I'm sorry.
It's
Okay. What did you say before that? Welcome to the Select Board meeting for Monday, November 28th, 2022. Call to order at 6:33 p.m. I know it's policies, but it's final read, so it might be quick, or it's potentially final read. So I'll go ahead and jump into review of the Police Department Policy 1.23, mounted electric bike policy, third read. Any discussion, questions, concerns?
no concerns.
Likewise. Would someone like to make a
Moving
motion?
right along, I'll make a motion to approve the mounted electric bike patrol policy and procedure number operations 1.23 with an effective date of 11/28/2022.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Review of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act Policy Draft, third read.
This was one of the few that I had asked for a holdover.
Correct.
I didn't have any concerns with the new language from the attorney. I just wanted to make sure we had ample time to read it.
Yep, yep. So is this, looking back, is this actually third?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't count last week as your third.
Okay,
so.
that's, yeah,
Yep.
that's what I was thinking. Okay.
No concern.
Same.
You good? I'll make a
Yep.
motion to approve Pregnant Workers Fairness Act policy, policy ADM-150 with an effective date of 11/28/2022.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And with that, I will call the joint meeting with the Board of Health to order at 6:35 p.m. Jeff, welcome. Are you expecting another member tonight? Okay. So won't be able to make a decision, but we can have a discussion, right, if you'd like, and start the conversation. I think there's a lot to absorb. So you're welcome to join us at the round table or at the side table, whatever you prefer. Absolutely. We set it up enough for the whole board. So
I've done enough times as a kid. Thank you for having me.
thank you for joining us.
Do you want me to?
I can
Sorry.
quickly just do an introduction and then turn it over to you.
That'd be good.
So there should be a memorandum in your packets describing the request that we would like to bring forward to the three of you. Several months ago, it came to the attention of the district, the Board of Health district that we're a part of, that we currently didn't offer health insurance to an employee who may be eligible. And under further evaluation of that, there wasn't an opportunity for the district to join an existing health trust, like the town's already part of. And so that began a long conversation between the three boards of health that comprise the district and talking about how we should move forward. And back in the 90s, one of the member towns played a lead fiduciary role for the district. That has not happened in the last 20 years. And so the request that we want to bring to the three of you would be for the town of Erving to play a lead fiduciary role in offering this health service that we've been part of for decades. And that would allow the staff to access health benefits that the town's a part of. So that's sort of the high level, and there's a lot of details that fall into that, but that's the gist of what we'd like to discuss today.
Yeah, I'll turn over to you first, and then I'm sure there's probably questions and
Yeah,
lots,
so
lots to it.
what we're asking tonight, or what we're going to ask tonight, is that if you're open for us to go forward with this idea, or with the three member towns, that we would like to draft a health officer position with description review for approval, and then an interim agreement that would cover us through June 30th of 2023. That way we can develop a full agreement for a multi-year agreement. So just as more of a background, I'm sure you already know, our health agent right now is through this Eastern Franklin County Health District. Our nursing services are provided through the FERCOG as well as the building inspector. It was discussed amongst the member towns that it was in the best interest of all the members to continue our service with the health agent that we've been using. There have been no complaints on their function and their efficiency. Everything's been really good, so we've been trying to maintain as much of that as we can, while still rectifying the issue that arose. But it is something that we have to address, and we can't continue to wait for it. I understand we as a board can't vote on it tonight, but
at least we can start the discussion, and if there's
Yeah.
questions, we can at least start that dialogue too, and concerns, and make some tentative plans pending a final decision.
Can I just quickly add to that? Part of the arrangement is that each of the member towns pays an assessment. So Erving has an assessment that's shared with the other two towns. And so all of the direct and indirect costs related to overseeing the service comes from that assessment that's budgeted every year. So the proposal would be that instead of the assessment going to the district, it would then come to the town of Erving. So the other two towns would be contributing towards both the direct and indirect costs associated with this service.
And so, just beyond the health officer or health agent specific role, that would become a direct employee in theory of Erving,
Right.
paid through what would likely be an enterprise fund, right?
yes.
Enterprise
that the district,
revolving, yeah.
had control of, which was the
Right.
assessments coming in. There's also a treasurer responsibility that we would take on to manage
Potentially,
the
yes.
enterprise fund, right?
Right.
As a management agent for it, or a
Right.
treasury agent. And then what about the clerk part? And maybe I missed it in there.
So the assumption And again, details still need to be worked out as we craft an MOA, if you're okay with us continuing to move down that direction. The goal would be that each town is then responsible for addressing their own clerical responsibilities. So instead of the district having a centralized clerical position, we would push that back out to each of the towns. Erving already has that function. The district for us just keeps duplicate copies of our files. So our files would return to Erving, Shutesbury's would return to Shutesbury, and each town would be responsible for having a clerical role within town hall.
So each town, part of the district, it's an output of money, and in return, it's management of services, and then, but all records and all of that become the town, so it kind of
Local.
keeps the district from having the responsibility for that. It's more of just
Right.
management function
Correct.
and financial
Correct.
management, and, okay, and employee management pieces,
Correct.
as well as oversight, but then the record keeping and individual town responsibilities fall back.
Correct. Which each town had that ultimate obligation anyhow. It's a bit duplicitous. And I do think through the conversations there's been maybe a little confusion in each of the towns as to how citizens or businesses access services. I think as each town has done it a little bit differently. So some may reach out to town hall directly first and then get sort of a pass off or a liaison to the health agent, whereas maybe another town just has a direct communication right to the health agent. So trying to be clear with everybody who's using the service, you start with town hall, you work through that channel, you get redirected to the health agent when appropriate for certain services.
Right.
So I think the process will allow each of the three towns to clarify not only their internal procedures, but also their external communications with the clients or the citizens who are going to use the service.
So the only thing I noticed on the documents that were sent, one was a letter and the other one was a spreadsheet for finances, is potential cost for health insurance, not included in that. So
Correct.
that's the only, I mean, that is currently what the assessment is, that the cost of doing business with the district. So the only increase would be if the current or any future benefited employee eligible decide to take health insurance, would be the only additional cost split amongst the three member towns.
Right. And that's already addressed in statute. When towns regionalize or share a service, there's already an approach for how you're one, allowed to do this, but two, break out that cost amongst the towns for those benefits. So we would follow that mechanism.
So my only question is, this is being offered to one individual, and that's the part-time health officer?
Are you talking about through our, if this was to go forward,
Yes.
the plan would be to
Yep.
offer the position to the existing employee?
Yep.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
So then the treasurer and the part-time clerk are less than 20 hours?
correct.
And I believe one of those, the treasurer, was more than happy to say, I think 35 years has been doing it.
25 at least, yeah.
25 at least, said, I have no problem, and stood behind the idea of having Erving take over the.
Okay.
With the understanding that so there's a few steps here. If we were to go
Yes.
down this road, the first goal would be to transition the benefits eligible staff member and get an interim agreement in place. And then we'd have several months of working out a permanent agreement, hopefully a multi-year agreement. With that being said, anytime you have a legal entity with financing and everything else, you've got to work through that right process to close such an entity. So that probably wouldn't be done until June 30.
Yeah,
Fiscal
end
year.
of
It's earliest.
fiscal year. Yeah, that was the plan.
So the staff members would still be working on that stuff, getting records back out to the town. So the other staff would be working on those things as the entity would wind down, if that is the path we go down.
Yeah.
And Erving would just be billing the district for the pieces that it was taking on
Correct.
leading up to the official
Correct.
full
Yeah.
shift.
Correct.
So I have no concerns. Our own policy says 20 hours is a benefited position, so
Correct.
based on that, I have no concerns.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was no concern from anybody at the table at the last district meeting. Everybody in principle, was okay with it going forward. There was a lot of questions about the logistics of how to shut down the current district, how to get the financing done properly, and that's where the interim discussion came in. Let's just get us through the end of the fiscal year and give us time to work out all those questions.
I think and obviously you're both of there, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think the most important thing that would need to be handled going forward is to ensure that the 3 towns' Board of Health remain at some type of oversight board decision level of the service so that they can meet regularly. If there are any concerns about the service, they can manage how that is handled and how we respond to that, and to obviously make the recommendation annually as to what the assessments are supposed to be and what the budget for the year should be. And I think those are very appropriate. That's a very appropriate role for each of the towns to have a Board of Health member or two, however that's reconstituted, sit at the table and make those decisions.
Just a question on the budget spreadsheet. What is the asterisk for on some of the items? Just curiosity.
I think we got.
Scroll.
I think we had a partial. We had one page
I'm
of a
sure there was
snippet.
something else, and that's okay. I was
Yeah, of a
curious if it's
multi-page
anything
document.
meaningful
We only
to
got
us or not.
one page.
Asterisks.
It's under vehicle allowance, under
Salary.
training.
Oh yeah, you're
Training.
right. We are missing the key on that piece.
Yeah, just a question for next time. Not probably immaterial, but.
Right.
And so then I'm assuming the admin assistant piece of salaries goes away in theory in the future years, give or take, in theory, and becomes a town cost instead of a district cost.
Correct.
Okay.
Paid for with the town,
Town funds, not district funds.
well, the town fund of Erving's, and then the assessments paid by the other 2 towns.
Say that again?
So you're talking about the staff cost, right?
Of admin assistant? Which
Oh,
is the
I thought you
clerical
meant
piece
of
right
the-
now, which goes away and becomes a town cost, not
That's
a
correct.
district cost, right?
I thought you were also
in the
referring to
future
the
years,
agent.
in theory?
In future
Right.
years, yeah.
Right,
Correct.
okay.
Yep.
And obviously, we'd have to provide data, and if we did it for a period of time on what, if there's a change to the treasurer's amounts and what the agent, salary costs and benefit costs for future years, right?
Right.
To inform that assessment. And we'd have to establish an enterprise fund, right? Which would have to be voted on, is that?
We will have to create some form of a fund.
Okay.
I'm trying to firm up exactly what the best course of action should be, whether it is appropriate to do an enterprise fund or to do it as a reserve fund, not a reserve fund, excuse me, a revolving fund.
Right.
Okay, I see.
Both of which would have to be presented to the voters, both of which would have their own budgets. The goal is to make sure that each fund retains its balance at the end of the year. So that would be available for appropriation. And there's just a question about if it's a revolving fund, does that get stored in its own bank account with its own interest-bearing funds? Or an enterprise fund truly does that? Is it more appropriate to do an enterprise fund? So we have that question out.
Okay.
Yep.
I think you mentioned some things about process a little different between the towns. Is that something you think, and it's more a question for you, or do you know if the district would plan to kind of set that as a standard across the towns and how, or would they, I think Brian said, how a concern or something comes through and into the health district and then gets addressed. Sometimes it's through a clerk and then to, or town hall or direct to the agent. And I'm just curious, especially if it was our employees, is there going to be a consistent approach that they're going to expect? Like every town's going to approach it this way for them? Is that going to be something the district overall define and implement, if you will? Or is that going to be left to each town to do their own?
So, as Brian said, similar to the record keeping, it would fall onto each town to develop their own phone system, response system that would then be in contact with the agent to dispatch the agent to the different needs, as opposed to a centralized communication system. In that way, there's no, each town is able to keep autonomy over the way they function in their process, as they do now. So it would actually create less of a change for them, because it's kind of how it functions now. It just reroutes them to the district. And part of this, to be clear, when we spoke to the council, she came to the last meeting, the district technically doesn't function as a district, as it's written in MGL. So we're kind of in a position where we like have to act on this. So we don't formally actually, we have a district in name and in title, and it was approved. So we're moving away from that, but by the mass general laws, it wasn't actually formally a district. So
Okay.
There's apparently
That's fine.
yeah,
the law, section A, B, right? And to build on what Jeff's explaining, the section that we adopted allows towns to have a regional service and to hire a shared health agent and to do that work, and so that's been done. The question about the additional powers or duties of a district, that doesn't appear to be the section that was adopted.
Right.
So it really is a little more than the sharing of an employee for regional services.
Gotcha. So it's really the much more concise, short. There's a management of shared cost and a shared
That's it,
agent.
Right.
That is
which is what we want to actually
shared.
formally
Period.
adopt.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. I think my thought process, not necessarily that each town had to follow the same internal processes, but is there a clear point where the health agent knows, okay, I expect this person to hand it off to me from this town, each town, or this town. That's who can authorize or not, because at some point there's a member and there's, in the district, and there's a cost borne by that action, and so like, is that clearly defined on how that comes in and is
Well, I think
approved?
that was part of that
Is
discussion.
it part of what
was
hopefully they're going to do?
the future
Yeah.
body of work would be to sort of talk about what those pathways are.
Okay. Great. I gather the request is to try to do this soon or by the end of the calendar year if possible,
yes, yeah, if possible.
in terms of the employee specifically
Right.
coming on as a town employee. And does the district feel within the current budget that any benefit change would be
Yeah.
covered for the 6 months or so?
They have, I mean, you see the budget as it stands today, but
Yeah.
they have additional
In the-
revenues within their accounts
in the
that
account.
they could appropriate.
Yeah, the discussion was, could easily get them through the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. I kind of assumed this was a budget, not a balance, so there was, but, okay. I don't have any concerns.
None.
You know. We've probably benefited from other towns taking on some of the management responsibilities for years, so if it's our turn and we have the capacity.
Yep.
I assume it's been discussed with the treasurer about
Yep.
taking that on as well?
Yeah, all the
Okay.
financial offices have been spoken to about this,
Okay.
sort of in preparation in case the three towns agreed to move in this direction. And to be clear, we offered, but it was open to any town to take the lead, and if they thought they had the capacity to do this. And I think based on several conversations, it seemed to be that Erving was probably poised to move on this quicker than any other town was in the position to do, and maybe could get this to a resolution quicker. So
Okay.
I think we can reasonably do this with the resources that we have.
So if in principle we're, favorable
Agreement.
towards
Yes.
it,
Okay.
then steps wise, what do you need from us, or what is next for the towns to make this happen in time for?
So we have the district meeting again this week.
Yep.
And so we will provide them that update that the three of you are amenable to us proceeding. We will draft a position description for your review, and I'll begin drafting an interim agreement between the three towns. I'm working with the councils in each of the towns and the admins to make sure it looks okay, make sure the boards of health have had a chance to weigh in on it and see if they have any concerns.
Is
and
it an agreement with the towns or the district for now? Not for July?
We asked that question.
Okay.
And the thought from council was it should be the three towns.
Okay.
But I think that's still an open question, so we need to put the draft forward, revisit it together, have the councils on each of the towns review it as well, and give us feedback. So the goal would
Maybe
be,
the three towns acting as or something,
Well,
right? And
the
like kind of a
idea
little bit
was
of both.
you started as the three towns, and basically you're leaving the district. You can't terminate it yet. There's processes to
Yeah.
do that, but you can leave it dormant. So
Okay.
instead of
Right.
creating new documentation and contracts with a district, have something that can stand beyond the district being dissolved.
Okay, right, moving in that direction.
moving in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So that's enough to proceed, and I assume the job description, while it's a town position, would be reviewed by the boards of the other towns,
Correct.
AKA the district.
Exactly. So what you will get will be drafts that they've also received and provided feedback on.
Okay. And then basically at some point, all three towns boards have to sign off on it. Like
Correct.
the interim agreement, and
Correct.
then we'll have to appoint an employee.
Correct. Which is obviously a little challenging with December holidays coming up and meeting schedules. So we're going to try to front end as much of this work in the first 2 weeks of the month to try to catch people at their different meetings. Maybe that some of this comes together right at the end of the month or beginning of January. But I don't think that what we need to accomplish in the coming weeks is actually too significant of a lift that we can't make happen. So,
Okay. I'm just thinking our last meeting of the year is likely the 19th unless we schedule an additional,
right,
and I think we don't come back till the 9th in theory,
right,
so.
right. Okay, so I will get that all drafted and hopefully have some drafts for you to see next on the meeting on the 5th,
Next week.
next week.
Yeah, I was going to say next Monday.
It's not far off.
No, it's 1 week. You have enough time?
We will find time.
Okay. If there's a need to schedule something different, because we're trying to make a timeline here, I'm sure we can try to find
Sure.
a short window
I was just going to
closer to
reiterate, I
the
think
end
all
of the
three of us
year.
have always said if there's a need for an additional meeting on a different night,
Okay,
We'll find
find
excellent.
a pocket of time
We
somewhere.
know we're taking them, just because the calendar's a big gap, there's Mondays there
Right.
between the end of the year, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, if we need to. I don't know when the papers land either. I don't know what the cycle of the district is, if it's weekly, bi-weekly, and versus ours, and where that lands in terms of if we, do it on the 5th or do it on the 29th, does it matter? May not matter.
it's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on this one?
Nope.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. Thank you for joining us,
Yeah,
Jeff,
thanks for
and
coming, Jeff.
anything else for us while we're here?
That's it. Thank
Okay.
you very much for having us.
Yeah, it's a lot, so thank you.
See ya.
I guess I will officially say we're
Which we never really.
not really ending our joint meeting because there was not a quorum, and returning to the board meeting.
Okay.
Review of the fraud prevention policy draft, third read.
I have no concern.
None here.
Same.
Make a motion, we adopt the Town of Erving fraud prevention policy, ADM-120.
Effective date today?
Oh, excuse me. Effective 28th, November 28th, 2022.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Review of the whistleblower protection policy draft, third read.
No concerns with this one.
None.
Same.
Make a motion to approve the whistleblower protection policy, file ADM-130, effective 11/28/2022.
Second. Excuse me. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Review of the workplace violence prevention policy draft, third read.
And I have no concern.
None.
Make a motion, we adopt workplace violence prevention policy, ADM dash,
I think that was 100.
ADM-100, effective 11/28/22.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I did have one note, just a typo on dot 4, the last sentence of the first paragraph, shall contact, doesn't look like there's a space between shall and contact.
Yeah, good catch.
There's 2 spaces up before are, but
I'll make that change.
it's minor, nothing of content. Excuse me. Review the domestic violence leave policy draft, third read. I just have to ask the question, Brian, maybe you know the answer. Not that we're lawyers, but why is 15 days need to be written as words and numbers, but 12 months is numbers fine?
I think that was just me not spelling that out. I'm happy to spell that out.
No.
There's no legal reason.
Okay, didn't know if there was. Sometimes you see
Nope.
both, like it's a, you know,
I can
and
take
one
a,
supersedes the other, and it's
No,
all a thing.
I can
Hey,
can
it's
fix
fine the
that.
way it is. I have no concerns with it.
Barring no concerns, I make a motion to approve domestic violence leave policy, ADM-180, effective 11/28/22.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Review of the clothing allowance policy draft, second read.
The only one on this one was there's been a request to adjust the amount from 250, which was set quite a few years ago.
over
Glenn,
a
how-
decade ago.
About 10 years ago.
It was before I started.
Yeah, at 250, and the request has been to change that
Say
to
that's what it was when I started.
right to 500. Other than that, that's the only change on that, or the change requested.
This is once a year, Glenn?
Yes.
It's basically issued as a what? As a taxable stipend? Is that how it?
It's issued in the first payroll of the year, of the fiscal year, and it is taxable per the IRS regulations. So, and it's meant for the purchase of the replacement of items that employees would wear that may be damaged during their traditional work, but it's more, they call it casual wear that you could wear anywhere. So jeans and things of that nature that may get damaged at work. It's not the same as uniforms.
Right.
So if somebody has a uniform that the town's providing, we do that through an expense account, and we cover that in a different manner.
I didn't see it called out. It's very short. I didn't see it called out in there. What if there's a new hire during year?
They're
Is it
provided the
just
same
issued?
benefit.
It's not prorated. It's just issued at
Correct.
first payroll or something of
Correct.
hire.
Their first payroll. Correct.
Do you want that added in?
I'm thinking it probably should be clear, just
Okay.
because it's ambiguous without it. I think whether or not, if you start 9 months into the fiscal year, do I get 1/4 or do I get all? Do I get none? How does that? So I just think we should define it.
Yeah, it'd just be a point number 3 under 03.
Okay.
Right.
I can make that
Or
change.
you can just change it in number 1 from dispersed in the first
Prorated.
payroll of the fiscal year. If you are not employed in the first payroll of the fiscal year, but during the year, then it will be issued in that payroll. And we're saying it is or is not prorated. I heard
I don't
not,
get,
but I
no,
don't.
not.
no.
Not,
It's just
yeah,
easier to
it's
just
easier
do it.
not to. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I can make those changes.
Was there any concern?
Do you have
with-
concerns with that?
Not at all.
Okay.
Was there concerns with the request of the dollar amount?
I have no concerns
I mean,
with the request.
Based
I don't
on
either.
based on burning through clothes myself out doing work, they're expensive to replace. 250 doesn't get you very far throughout the year. burn through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't wear that.
Do have a question. Do we request a return receipt on items purchased, or is this just a,
No,
Uh,
not anymore because
we used to.
it's paid through the payroll.
yeah?
We used to purchase
Mhm.
and then turn receipts in to get reimbursed, but then I guess that was not right. So that's why I decided to start doing it through the payroll.
So what Glenn's describing is it was a reimbursement process before,
Mm-hmm.
with the understanding that it's an IRS overseeing process through payroll.
Mhm.
That did change. And so it just gets processed out in that first payroll of the year. And therefore, the tracking of receipts throughout the year as you're spending on items became quite the tedious task. So we
And
discontinued that.
irrelevant, because
And
even if they
irrelevant.
only spent $100 of the 5 or $250, it's already been paid. We can't withhold
Yeah.
future earnings
Right,
or ask for a reimbursement for unspent wages.
right.
So
It's more-
it's actually a wage increase as opposed to,
It's like a stipend.
Right.
That's why I said
Right.
it's like a
Right.
stipend for,
Right.
for the fact
Right.
that the,
Right.
in theory, that department work doesn't have a uniform requirement.
right,
Like,
Right.
you know, I'm not picking on PD, but Chief's here, where there's a uniform and that is paid for by the town and got through a vendor or with receipts.
Yeah.
And instead, this is a acknowledgement of the fact that the work is likely to damage clothing a lot more than me sitting in a chair here.
Right.
And so they're going to, you know, because of the nature of the work, have a higher, you know, clothing need and or potential to completely destroy
Correct.
in a day, sometimes probably, articles of clothing. So it's just it's more of an acknowledgement of the
Correct.
potential, you know, impact of the job. And so,
I think it's fair to say there's some years that they will outspend that stipend, and then there's other years that they won't spend at all.
Right.
And
Right.
it balances out if you know, year over year.
Right.
right. I think building and ground should, I can't even say it that way. Building and ground should be buildings and grounds, plural. I can't even say it without the S's.
Got it.
Sounds funny. Or you can say building and grounds, but there's more than one building, so I think they both should be. That's just minor. Other questions or concerns on this one?
none?
No.
Third read next meeting?
Yes, please.
Cool.
Thank you.
Review of the proposed personnel bylaw draft. First,
Technically second.
second,
Second.
second, second read, I guess.
Yeah, we didn't really discuss it. It was
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, it was a first read. I'll just start with the first one, A. We're gonna actually commit to getting a personnel board
So,
that's
I
active.
was on the same
appointed,
section.
and-
I was
sorry.
actually on section 4.
I know it's the
looking
first
at-
thing, but
No, I was looking at section 4, which is personnel board, and I was going to bring up the same thing. But we also, I don't know exactly what the language is in here, but should that not happen, it can default back to this board taking on that responsibility, which is what the current status is. So,
Right.
you know, that default sort of, if we can't get a board together, because we know how difficult that can be to get, especially a 5-member board, those duties can be held by us.
Right.
or in absence of is probably
In ab-
language
yeah.
we should add in there, right? In absence of, the select board itself would serve as, until at which time we
I think it's already in there, isn't
create
it?
one. Is it further down? Did I not?
Yeah,
did
I
just
just
not
gotta,
catch
I
it?
can't remember exactly what section.
Okay.
I've done so many.
Brian starting to
Try
blur
to like put
together.
them
They all
aside for a little
blur.
while and come back to them because they start getting a little difficult to not mix them all up. maybe I'm not following, but the other one under section 1B2 versus section 1E. They sound contradictory to me. In one, it says it does not apply to positions in a in a CBA, and then E, it says unless otherwise indicated, it does apply to a CBA. Or am I misreading that?
I will ask how we can clarify the language. What it's trying to imply is that there's certain aspects that do apply, absolutely. But there are some provisions that there could be conflicting language between the
Right.
CBA and here.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases, the bylaw is making an allowance that the CBA will
Supersede.
rule in that instance. So we
Okay.
can clarify that language.
And I wondered if B2 was also trying to specifically address one portion, like groups and classes, as opposed to like the whole thing.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
to me, maybe we can do
It's
better.
not clear enough.
Maybe we can do better on the wording.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. Those are the things that get teased out when we're having these conversations, but
You
They
could have
don't-
read it 20 times and not seen that.
yeah.
Absolutely. Or maybe just to take that out of B and just put it all in, further clarify E except for XYZ and have that just be focused on CBA separately.
Okay.
I don't know what the right way, but something would help for me.
Brian, I had a question on Article 1,
Article 1. Yep.
meal and break periods.
Oh.
I read it, but I didn't see,
I think that's in the personnel manual.
That's in the manual.
oh, okay.
You're in the
I'm sorry.
manual? Not the bylaw, right?
Oh, okay,
Is that right? Yeah, you're in the manual.
okay.
We'll get there, but did I call the right thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I called the bylaw first, so we're
Do you
going
want
to
me
get
to
to
jump to
that.
the manual?
Mhm.
No, we'll get there.
Okay.
I'm just reviewing it one more time to find that language about.
That I was asking about on personnel board.
Because I know
there?
we discussed it.
We absolutely
in
discussed it.
several meetings, we discussed it, and.
I'm wondering if that didn't
So-
make it into this draft
It
for
may
some
not
reason.
have made it into the draft.
And these are they're small things. I think they're good for clarity, but they're small things that
Yeah.
just. Another one is section 3 definitions. A board is the personnel board. C, a personnel board is the board. Is that
Okay, I see what you're
confusing? And it also has board of selectmen, not select board on C. I don't know if
Yep.
there was other places, but
Got it.
A seems confusing to just be ambiguous about what board
Yep.
when we're talking about multiple boards in the document. I may just lean away from having A at all if we can.
Mm-hmm.
Because is board the personnel board or is board the select board, et
Yep.
cetera?
I'll make those changes.
F, with the exception of obviously the excluded agreements, CBA employees and such, is 1 year not impacted by statute in any of those non-CBA positions? Is 1 year valid, as far as we know? On a probationary for
You
a
can
full
set the
year?
probationary period at anything. We do
Yes.
have a requirement under statute to provide 1 year for new patrol officers, the
Correct.
initial hire.
Right, right.
Everybody
But
else.
there's no other statutory. That was my question. I don't,
Yep.
Okay.
You do have a provision in the statutes for police chief and fire chief that say if you're not going to continue, you must give them a 1 year notice.
Right. But that doesn't preclude a initial 1 year probationary period on hire.
No,
I don't think that's excluded.
correct.
Although you can't do a 1 year probation and give them a 1 year notice. Unless you give it to them the day they hire, just in case I might not keep you next
For
year.
those extreme circumstances.
Here's your contract for 1 year and we may not renew in 1 year.
Exactly. So with that being said, this definition
Huh?
of
I'm
a
sorry?
probationary,
I can imagine.
this probationary period is a change. In your
Correct.
past manual, you had a 6-month period,
Mm-hmm.
but that was tied to the administration of benefits as well. And so you'll see when you get to the manual, we are proposing that we strike all of that language, allow the probationary period to be a year, and then in the manual, we have a benefits eligibility period of 30 days.
Yep.
So we've decreased the amount of time that a new employee would have to wait to use their accrued time with this proposal, but we've increased the period with which the probation can last for a new employee to work through the position. The other
Is there a
definition that
differ-
seems to be missing from here, now that I'm rereading this, I'm not seeing my seasonal employee designation. So I need to go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, I think you have all the others.
Hmm?
I think you have all the others.
Right.
Is regular full-time, so you have that at 40 hours?
What about it?
You have the regular full-time at 40 hours.
Correct.
Did we historically have that at something different? I feel like I remember something about 36 plus. No?
On the school side, they have a different
But not
definition.
outside of CBA, we don't? Okay.
Nope. So yeah, most of this language is either something that has been recommended to add clarity because it wasn't clear before, or this is actually what was in the personnel manual that we are suggesting is elevated to a bylaw level.
Well, you can see the clarity about my questions that we
Yeah.
had before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did we?
Even just reformatting a lot of this has, and reviewing it with staff has allowed questions to arise that have never been asked before. So it's been a long process, but I think it's been extremely helpful to have those conversations with staff.
The other one, again, I might have missed it, but you have regular part-time, you have regular full-time, temporary, special, exempt. You talked about seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
Am I missing less than 20?
I asked that question at the last meeting.
Because
too.
what is the difference between part-time and regular part-time? Isn't it less than 40? Or is that supposed to be like part-time benefited versus part-time unbenefited?
The regular part-time
Right.
is part-time benefited.
You're right. We
Right.
had meant to add some clarity in
We
there
did.
because we do have both employees who are under 20 hours a week
Right.
Correct.
who are part-time and regular, but they are not benefits eligible.
So I'm guessing that really probably needs to be regular part-time benefited employee, and then we'll need to define an unbenefited if we need them to be separate.
Yep. I will take care of that.
I know I barely got us past the second page, but
No, it's,
This is exactly what we need.
something else. Bill, if you had anything, please chime in. I don't want to take up the whole. While I scroll through for some of my last.
and I've
Comments.
seen it so many times. I've probably read over the same things. And
You've read all the context that should be there, whether it was or not.
correct.
Right.
I need new voices.
Fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And is 5 the right number of people in the personnel board? I don't have anything. I
can
don't
be
have any
anything you
concerns
want.
about 5, except for the ability to fill it.
Yeah, when we first discussed that, originally I was thinking 3, just be, for ease of making, getting enough people on there. But if you can get 5 allows you some more flexibility to still have people missing and have a quorum and still meet.
And have more opinion. Well,
And
actually
have more
less,
eyes.
because you only need 2 and a 3. You need 3 and a 5.
Yeah, you can,
But I'd
you
argue
can-
I'd
you can
rather
be-
have 3 as a minimum if we can get there.
Yeah.
But that was just a question.
I mean, what we may be able to do is put the language in there that it's a minimum of 3, a maximum of 5, with the composition to be set by the select board, so that if you are in a period where it's hard to get the members, the select board could vote to change it to a 3 member, so you could still meet the quorum, as opposed to holding it at 5 and not being able to get all your members.
So So we could adjust it.
Yeah,
As long as it
there's
is.
a lot of statutes that provide for the composition of boards and commissions that can be adopted locally, and then it's up to each community to set within that range what's your membership.
But you're
I
saying,
think like a youth commission can have like 21 members, and that would be unnecessary in a town of the size, right? So you have a range. It must be an odd number. So I think we could structure that in a way to give you that flexibility as the needs of the town change over time. Or we could just choose one or the other, three or five.
but if it's a, so you're saying the language would, though it's a bylaw, would give the authority to modify the composition between 3 and 5 members as needed under the decision or direction of the
Right.
select board? Okay.
As the appointing authority.
I'm open to it. It's up to the rest of the group. We don't have to decide tonight. It was something to think about.
Yeah. No,
Think-
I
Yeah,
like
I don't
that.
have any concerns.
I like that
mean,
idea of giving the flexibility of 3 or 5.
Right. Just if we set it at 5 and we struggle to get 2, well, now you don't have a quorum and you can't meet and you can't.
Either in the
used-
beginning we
it
get
used
2
to
or
be
we
2.
lose.
Well, it was 3, and then one person passed,
Yeah.
and it went to 2, and it stayed at 2 for years, and then those 2 finally felt that the board wasn't listening to the personnel board anyways, and
Right.
so they left.
Right. So,
I like it too. So yeah, if we can draft language to allow it to be
Okay.
flexible. I think history would say we have opportunity. If we have the opportunity to change that as interested, people are willing to put in the time, it's better. Something else in that section. It's probably not a big thing, but the term of office piece in there too. Just because in some it's not supposed to be more than one term or multiple terms. To me, it's a little ambiguous whether it's supposed to, they can only serve for 3 years or they can only serve 3 years that, consecutively. Or what is that supposed to mean? I'm assuming it's designed to say we're going to appoint for a term up to 3 years. But that's
Okay.
not to say they can't be reappointed for another immediately following. Probably to your point, it was the same people for lots of years.
Right, yeah.
And I would hate to, I've seen that in some of ours where you're not allowed to serve over more than a certain number of terms.
cultural council.
And yeah, okay, thank you. I like it in concept, to keep it fresh variety. I mean, no offense, I like both of you guys and I like what I'm doing, but I think that applies here sometime. However, we are a small town.
Right.
It is difficult to get interested parties as it is if we
Right.
then further restrict it because of those who are no longer allowed.
Right.
So, just to
Okay.
be clear about that. I'll look through it again too after for what you were talking about with the
It's not in
personnel
there.
board. It's not in there?
It's not in
Okay,
there.
all right.
I've read it all the way through.
Okay, I
There was
thinking
a
I missed it, but-
conversation we had, I think, with Corey, with legal counsel, about, it was at the end of one of our last meetings.
Yeah. So I can propose the language that we had talked about.
Okay. I think for the moment, that's the bulk of what I had noted. I'm gathering, obviously, we've discussed anything that I brought up, and you've read it plenty times. Anything that you wanted to add at the moment, or are you good for this read?
Meal and break period?
We're gonna get to that, and
Okay.
that's in, so there are two different documents.
Yep.
So the first one is the bylaw, and that's its own standalone, and then the one you're referring to is going to be the personnel and policy manual. So two different standalone documents. One will be under the first one will be under the control of the town by town vote, and the second one will be under control of the select board.
If you go down to section 21, that is and that's what I'll have to go back and clarify.
21 within the bylaw.
The bylaw.
Yeah.
I'm still the bylaw, sorry.
It's the
No,
very,
no, I thought you were talking
it
about the
is-
packet for a
It's the
second.
very last one, and it does talk about.
That deals with the collective bargaining issue
Yeah.
that you were
Okay.
questioning up in
In the
section
very
1.
top, yeah, is
So I'll
not,
find a way to clarify that.
okay. Got it. Well, if there's nothing else on that one for tonight,
Make the revisions and another read next week.
another read next
I'm
week.
assuming this will be
yeah.
several reads, which
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that 3 is going to do the trick. I think.
agreed.
Yeah. I need to absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully not to the point that Scott did, but where I can still see some things that may or may not be of concern or question. Not to pick on you, Scott. Appreciate you doing all the work on this as the lead, really.
It's really more. I'm the secondary eyes, Brian and Jen, and
Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the team working on this
Yeah.
because it's a lot of work to put these together and go through them.
Tangent to all of this, but because it's a bylaw question, back when you were working on the town code and we talked about Purby and whether or not it needed to be addressed in a bylaw revision, which is what this is, you had also asked about the cable advisory committee. And so I've put together some draft language on what the update to the cable advisory committee should look like, or could look like, to deal with what you discussed back in September, August, when we were working on that project. Is that anything that you all would want to see in the coming weeks, months, as you're starting to think about town meeting season and what you may want to bring forward to the voters? I drafted it and just put it in like a to be revisited file.
I guess that answers what I was going to say is as time allows, if it's on your list, but you've already done it, it sounds like.
Okay.
We fit it into a meeting and
Okay.
I know that specifically, at least initially, is designed from a point of being related to the franchise agreement,
Yes.
but is maybe just for a thought, just because you asked it before I forget, is cable the right thing? Should it be something larger, different? Is it media? Is it, you know,
Yeah.
hopefully someday there'll be other providers in town, you
Right.
know, other options. Does it cover this, you know? Because some of what that money and stuff was to do was to be able to broadcast. So is that kind of oversee some more of that? And that's a conversation to have with it,
Yeah.
but just a thought process of, is it more than just kind of the
think you-
franchise agreement and what that means?
I think you could treat it like we sort of treated select board when we did the special legislation to change you from board of selectmen to select board. In the language you said, the powers of a select board or of a board of
Oh.
selectmen are given to the select board, right? And so I think
Because it's defined in
Because it's
MGL
defined in
as a
MGL,
cable. Okay, gotcha.
I think
gotcha.
we would just say whatever you call this board, or rename this board,
Got it.
and whatever duties you give it, we could put right in the foundation article for that bylaw that the powers of the cable advisory committee, as defined in the MGL, are given to this board.
Right, in addition to
In
everything
addition
else we
to it.
define for a mission statement or, a- okay, I gotcha, perfect, thank you. I had a feeling you were gonna tell me it was an MGL, like
It is.
granted authority title, right? Okay, next one, review of proposed personnel policies and procedures manual draft second read. I will give you the floor, Bill, as I did lots of talking on the last one. I'll let you start us off on this one. If you'd like. Not to put you on the spot. Kind of.
I think you had questions about was
breaks?
it meal and break period.
Yeah, Article 1, I believe it was.
Yep.
My only question was, we call out the policy and procedure for uniforms for the police department. But we didn't call out the library situation that we had as well, so.
So
I have a response to your note on there regarding that, but go ahead.
Okay, so in general, again, this process of going through all of these policies has been very helpful to understand what's been happening in every department. I think there's two issues here. One, we may have an operational need to do something different than what the policy calls for, or what Fair Labor Standards Act calls for. And if we do something different, that should be paid time. And then I think we have some practices that have developed that we need to question whether or not they should continue within departments. My overarching fear out of all of this is that people are skipping breaks and not taking them, which is not appropriate. And I don't want to further that without dealing with those issues. But if there's truly an operational staffing need, and that's what my comment was trying to address, that the question's been raised, we may have the library as another issue that needs to be addressed. And so there may be a waiver process or some acknowledgement process that we can call out that the employee and the appointing authority can agree to. My concern is that it's not necessarily a done issue, because at the end of the day, the employee reserves that right to have those breaks. And if they change their position on that, regardless of an acknowledgement they previously agreed to, they're entitled to their breaks. And so if we had the staffing concern before, we will once again have the staffing concern. So I want to see if we can work through that, but there may not be a perfect solution to it.
One of the solutions that I talked about at the last department head meeting, when that question got brought up specifically, Abby brought that up regarding the library, was potentially modifying the hours to have closed hours for lunch. And so just do a split day. And if it's evening
Close for
hours,
half an
you
hour.
close again for dinner. And so you just, and obviously that would be a change in, services that we're offering. So I wouldn't suggest that if we approve this and it were to go into effect, immediately, that would have to roll out over time. You'd have to give patrons time to understand the difference, and any future programming that they were offering would have to be molded around that. But allowing time to just shut down. And I think the example I gave was the CVS pharmacy is open 24 hours, and yet they close from 12 to 1 every single day for their employees to have lunch. It's just the
There's
way
no
they do it.
dinner or
They
overnight
might have
meal,
a dinner
but-
one as well.
No,
but maybe their
I'm kidding.
staffing plan is different at night. I don't know.
Sure,
but
sure. No, I'm
I've
teasing.
shown up there before at noon and realized
Yep.
I have to come back after 1 o'clock.
Yep.
So
No, I
Post
absolutely
office,
100%
pharmacies,
agree.
it's pretty common.
they all do it. Just
I-
closed for lunch period.
I just want to make sure that we avoid any language that suggests that employee can waive their rights because you really can't.
Right.
Right.
And that's, we've been having these feedback sessions with employees, and this has been a point of conversation in every one of those meetings. And I reiterated that point each time, that while we can create some type of acknowledgement process, if people want to try to work through that break, it's not a done deal, and it could change again. I still don't think it addresses the concern that employee groups fought for years to have those breaks and to be entitled to them, and us saying, okay, you don't want to take your break, work through it, is throwing that out the window. And I don't understand why we would do that. But maybe there's situational operational needs where, again, police is emergent. I get that. So that makes sense to me. Other public safety may be emergent. When you're snow plowing, that's emergent, you can't stop. So I think that there's situational operational needs. I'm hard pressed to find other instances throughout the town where our work is so emergent that somebody is not entitled to their break. So I am concerned about that.
To that point, though, do we need to add some language, either with a department head or some authority to make that call? Because, I mean, you gave the snowplow example. There can be, public works, public safety emergencies, right, fire, et cetera, where they may not be able to because of a situation, right? An emergent situation, not an everyday practice. If that happens, is that just, how is that handled, right? Because then it becomes a paid lunch and,
Right.
and all of that.
Right. I can work on some language.
At the
for
very
that.
least, it becomes paid time, right? But it should be something that, to me, when that's going to happen, there's going to be some
Right.
department head or some level of authority that says that that's okay to do because it's the exception,
Correct.
not
Yep.
the standard.
Yep, so I can add some language on that. Absolutely. The other issue, just for your awareness, the 2 paid 15-minute breaks, which are meant to be one in each of the shifts, that's always been in your policies. That is not new.
Right.
It is interesting to me that some staff are finding that to be new information. And so, again, I think the practice of going through this and walking through this, talking through with everybody, and making sure that not only staff members but managers are reminded that that is part of their day, and that should be practiced is important. So I'm happy to call out every change that we've made, but that's not a change. That's just that's been your practice and that's been your policy.
I'm not saying that we can't do more than is required, but that's not true of a 4 or 6 hour employee. That's an 8 hour employee, correct?
If you are a
By-
4-hour
by labor law.
employee,
4, it's 15, 6, it's 15 and 30, 8, it's 15, it's
Correct.
2 15s and a 30,
Right.
right?
but you're not required to make those paid. We've always offered them paid.
Right, I'm just saying, do we need to be clear? Are we giving
Oh,
a 4 hour
okay. Now I
employee
get what you're
2
saying.
15-minute
Oh,
paid
yeah.
breaks?
I can make that clear.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Almost
don't
calling
think
out
that's
the
the-
table, just like you talked about.
Yeah, just kind of like-
triggers, I should say.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost part of that informational, like it's not an option, it's required,
Right, right,
Yep,
right.
kind of thing. So
I can be clear about that.
being there paid though,
Mm-hmm.
they can't leave.
Correct.
It's on
Correct.
site.
Right, right.
That is correct.
So just to maybe want to just denote that. Only comments I had is I almost might, right in the middle of that first paragraph, town encourages, I'm going to just drop encourages and say town requires. I think
Yeah.
it's nice to
says-
say we encourage it. It's not an encouragement, it's required.
Okay.
I don't know, to take.
We encourage and require.
Yeah, we encourage you to do it. Please do, but you have to. It just
Or you
doesn't
could-
work
you
for
could
me.
put-
We were trying to be nice.
No, I know.
You could put a note at the bottom of the page referencing you can't violate fair labor standards laws.
Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, you can't get any more concise than that.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And then the last line of that one, and as such, police officers, there's an as missing.
Yep.
Do you know where it goes past 8? Is there, I'm just not familiar if there's any continued addition to the requirements beyond 8. There's not, right?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay. There probably is at 16 or something, but I don't think so. I think before that.
No.
We good with meal breaks?
I'm good with meal breaks.
I'm going to move on to the next
We're
one.
going to hit overtime where there
Yeah.
are some questions and yeah.
Yeah, well, there's some notations on there, and there was discussion on how we do this, how and whether or not paid time counts as work time towards the
Calculation of overtime.
calculation of overtime. Council recommended against it. All I can do is recall my 20 years, and I said this at the last department head meeting. My time on paper that I earned, to me, is just as valuable as the time that I'm in the chair doing the job. So they should count the same. If I work Monday through Friday and I am working the evening on, or supposed to work in the evening on Friday, and I need to be somewhere and I take time off, but yet there's a need on Saturday to come into work, that's overtime. It's beyond my regularly scheduled hours. Whether or not I was physically there on Friday or I use my time, I shouldn't be forced to flex. We shouldn't be imposing flex time on staff to say that you no longer get overtime. We'll just deduct the hours that you would have used holiday for and then pay you straight time on Saturday. Because that's basically what you're doing.
Deduct. I
So-
understand your concept, so if it's not pertinent, that's fine, but I don't
Yeah.
follow what you just
Well,
said.
no, so if, let's say I was off on Tuesday, And I took a day off, but then there was a need to come into work on Friday, which I was not going to be there. But there was a need, and somebody asked me to come in. I came in. This says that if I have used time, I'm not eligible for overtime. So I'm either just going to get straight time or not use my holiday time or whatever I took on that Tuesday and put that back in my bank.
Oh,
pay
I
me-
see what you're saying, okay.
And pay me straight time for that.
So I'll get 40 or I get 48 of straight time. There's no OT. If it was eight,
Right.
just for an example, right?
Right.
You had 32 plus a holiday of 8.
Right,
Now
and so
you're-
from,
yeah.
from my experience and in the way in my 20 years' experience in the public sector, my paper time, my PTO, is just as valuable as me in the chair doing the job. So if I've used, with limitation of, I think he had mentioned sick time. I don't think sick time is a qualifier for that per se. I think there's some, there's certain situations where using sick time may not allow you to get the overtime. But those are, we'd have to tease those out.
Well, I also think after a pandemic, we shouldn't be encouraging people to come to work if they're sick.
Right, so I think we have to, there's a little nuance there.
Yeah.
But I think, in talking with Jennifer in one of the last meetings, we have been for quite some time requiring that if they used paid time during the week, any overtime that would have accrued after that is no longer overtime, and there's adjustment to.
Well, they have to hit worked 40, right? It's
Right.
physically worked 40
Physically worked 40.
before you are eligible.
Yeah.
Versus total time
Right.
on your timesheet,
On
for your
timesheet.
example. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I would suggest that we still stick with 40 hours of timesheet time.
Today it's the latter, or the former, right? It's work time to get to
So-
40?
Just to be clear, your personnel policies to date have not had an overtime provision in them.
Right.
They've been
But the
following.
practice,
So they've been following FLSA. What I'm finding is practice has varied from department to department, which is why it is important to put this in writing as to
Yes.
what the practice is. And so we are trying
no,
to
what the
reconcile.
policy is, not what the practice
Thank
is.
you. What the policy is, and so the policy started from this is what FLSA requires.
Right.
Yep.
And so now we're going through that massaging process of, well, that may be what FLSA says. This is what my department's been doing, and trying to come to a comprehensive policy that works townwide. And so I think that there's certain practices that make sense to adjust, i.e. we've stricken the word holiday in this current draft because
Right.
we weren't counting that against the calculation for overtime.
Correct.
There's been the request to remove vacation and personal from that. I agree. If you are to go in that direction, please don't remove sick. We should not be encouraging people to come when they're sick to work.
Wait, don't remove sick. What do you mean by don't remove sick?
Like there's, with the exception that says time for vacation, sick
Yeah.
and personal
Or
are
any
not
other leave.
considered worked hours.
Yeah.
If you are to strike vacation and personal, please don't remove sick as well, because I don't think sick should count towards vacation.
Towards overtime.
Correct. We should not be encouraging people to come on overtime when they've been sick. They should be home.
Yeah,
Well,
but
it actually is the opposite.
I think
effect,
it's
but
the
that's
opposite.
okay.
So I think the opposite would happen is what if,
You're sick all week and then come in on the weekend for overtime.
right.
If it was eligible.
If it was eligible, I'm sick on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, and then then you come in later in the week and you get overtime.
Right, that's what we're trying to avoid. What this sentence says is that the time that's used towards vacation, sick and personal time, or any other leave of absence will not be considered hours work.
Right, but you said you don't want to encourage people to come in sick.
Correct.
It's the opposite, I think.
Correct.
Is what we're saying, Scott and I think.
Yeah.
If you counted sick towards the calculation of overtime, it encourages people to use sick and then try to get overtime on top of that, even if they're not sick. I don't think it encourages them to come in sick. That doesn't
No.
make sense because it doesn't hurt you to use it. It
Right.
only helps you towards overtime. So I don't think it has the effect that you were saying. I think
Got
it has
it,
the
okay.
opposite effect. That's all.
As long
I
as we're not
still agree
encouraging
with
people
you.
to
I
come
don't
in.
think it should be part of the
Please
calculation.
don't come in if
Let's
you're
just
sick,
say that.
please. Okay.
I understand what
Thank you.
you're saying.
No, we want people to.
We do want
stay
people to
home.
stay home if
Thank
you're
you.
sick. Don't
That's
share.
separate from this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different question.
Yeah.
Right.
No, and
Okay.
I think, one of my examples, and if, Glenn, if I could just use your department for a minute, the unexpected overtime, or even police, unexpected overtime of, I wouldn't want to see sick time used as a backfill. So either fire, police, highway, anybody that's stuck on an emergency or some situation for 16, 18, 19, 20 hours, and then wants to leave early, and still keep the overtime the way it was. They had
Oh.
accrued 10 hours of overtime. You can't backfill that day. I'm going home. I'm wiped. I've been up for 24 hours. I can't function straight. I need to leave.
Yeah.
You can't backfill the rest of your shift with sick time.
To keep that at.
To keep that
You
at.
still work
You-
those hours, but yeah.
That PTO would have to be either holiday or vacation, or if you had comp time, if
gotcha.
we're doing comp time, all of that, but not sick time per se. That's different, and that teases out a difference of, is sick time on Tuesday because I genuinely was sick, does that still allow for overtime on Saturday? So that's something that would have to be discussed.
Yes, yes. I know you put that on the table, and I think Glenn, is this specific to overtime?
Yes.
So if you guys are okay with it, I'll let him offer his input before we respond to it.
So
I just
I'll
made
give
you
a
come up because I
scenario.
didn't before, and I realized that people can't hear you that well. So-
No, that's fine. So I'll give you a scenario with the highway department. If we've plowed our whole shift, we've plowed all night long into the next day shift, roads are cleaned up, parking lots are cleaned up, sidewalks are cleaned up, everybody's exhausted, not safe to be there. We are filling time with sick time. I don't feel as though people should lose their overtime for that, so we were filling time with sick time. And I know in the past, a treasurer did not want to do that, said it was wrong. But then we came to an agreement that, like Scott had said, that all your PTO time that's your earned time. That's whether you're here or it's vacation, sick time or whatnot. It's just as valuable as if you're actually here working. So you don't lose your overtime. I think that's a good spot where I think sick time should be able to be used for it and not take away vacation time. You got too many hours into it, you're unfit to work, unsafe to work. I think there's some exceptions to the rule. I understand working, coming in sick to get overtime. I don't think that's right. But I think if you're overtired, not able to work safely, I would like to think that sick time could still be used in that manner.
For the record, I'm not saying I'm pro or against. I have my own personal experiences, and I'll explain that later. But
Yeah.
if it's relevant, but just a couple things. So this sounds like a example of the inconsistency because you're saying sick counted towards it, and I'm hearing that in other areas of town we're saying the only worked hours counted to get to overtime, and you're saying the practice has not been that. Not to pick on you, but just you're bringing that example,
Yep.
and you're saying sick counted, and not judging that, just to be clear, and then if the issue of safety and working that many hours, I guess in one level I say if the department has deemed that you guys have worked too long and you shouldn't be working the next day, it's not safe, then you're not working. It doesn't, and that could be just not paid, not worked, because you already worked your your 8 hours and then or 10 hours and then some in in a continuous shift from the prior day. I understand that's an overtime implication, and I'm not saying I'm for or against that impact, but just the idea that if it's not safe for the team to be working because of the hours they've already served, then that to me is just a decision that's made that people aren't working, whether they want to or not, whether they are going to get overtime or not. I think just to tease the two out, I think something Bill said a minute ago about sick versus, sick being counted towards overtime or not, and the idea that we don't want people to come in sick. Two different issues. To me,
Yes, this is two different issues.
If people have been working that many hours, and they should not continue whenever we can stop because the the emergency is over, then that should just be mandated you're not working, regardless of what happens with the compensation time. I don't know what you two think, but I think that's just a basic thing we need to be clear about. And I'm not saying it even goes in here, but just the idea that that's a directive to the department head. Like if your team has worked that many hours and it's not safe to stay and continue working or to work the following shift, even if it's 4 hours later, then that's just mandated by the department head or whoever's in charge of that incident to say that.
Yeah, but I would also take it one step further and sort of find the balance on that and saying that if that decision is made, say, and we're talking one specific scenario, we've been on shift too long, department head says it's unsafe to continue, we're calling it. The person that had just worked 20 hours straight has the option of saying, can I use my PTO for the rest of the day? You're sending me home, can I use the PTO and maintain that I was here for 22 hours straight? I would like to earn the overtime rate for the latter 16 hours or whatever, that I was there. So, looking at it that way, or they could have the option of, I'll just flex it and not use my PTO.
I'll just get straight time for
I'll
the
just
bulk
get
of it
straight
and
time
just
for
have the
bulk
time
of it
off.
and just have the time off, and I'll use it later in the summer, or whatever. I think, giving that flexibility. And the reason I say not sick is, under sick leave usage, it even says when an employee cannot perform their duties because the employee is incapacitated by personal illness or injury. And tired isn't a personal illness or injury.
Okay.
That's different. So it doesn't really qualify for sick use.
So
And when you say, and this is just a term issue, when you say PTO, you are not including sick?
No.
And when you said PTO, you are including sick.
Yeah.
The PTO does not include sick, I believe by definition. 'Cause
Paid time off is.
paid time off is earned, like vacation, holiday, those sorts of things. It is
Typically.
not typically sick time. Sick leave is
Typically.
a separate thing.
well, and so
It's not part of PTO. I know people treat it as the same, may sometimes use it as the same even, and there are, regulations and laws that allow them to use it for things that are not quote unquote being sick by right, but they aren't PTO. Sick is not
I was
PTO, just
unaware of
for,
that.
yeah.
I thought
I mean,
PTO
maybe
was-
I'm wrong that that isn't ever considered PTO, but my experience is never, it's not part of PTO.
Okay.
But it's just so we all talk in the same terms, not to.
So, I appreciate this conversation because this is exactly an example of where we're finding some unequal application of what we're trying to accomplish here and what we're trying to rectify. And I almost never disagree with Glenn. So this is the one time I feel like I am. Because I appreciate the conversation here. I think we need to find a different way to deal with this. And I had the similar conversation earlier today with Chief Holst. We have to find a different way to deal with this. Misappropriating sick time is not the correct application, I believe. And so I think if we're hearing from the department heads that there's a different concern that we need to address, I think the three of you need to hear that, and then we need to work through a policy resolution on that piece. And I'm not trying to dramatize the pandemic, but I think after 2 years of seeing what health concerns can do to an operation, I'm going to be like a dog with a bone on this one. Misusing sick time or having people bank it and not stay home when they're sick. Because they want to keep that in the background because during plowing season they may need it. I do not want us to set any policy standards that encourage people to do that. It is specifically meant to make sure that the employee has compensation and does not have to come to work when they're ill because it protects them, but it also protects the rest of the workforce.
Yep.
And so I'm not going to be okay if we don't protect that. If we can find a different policy resolution that deals with the concerns that the department heads are bringing up, I'm all for that.
And again, I thought that PTO time included sick
Yeah.
also, so.
But I think that's how people talked about it.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a common perception, managerially, human resource wise, and that I've come to learn very distinctly in most of my career that they are usually defined very separately for some of the reasons that Brian just said.
Okay.
And because there's statutory, things around those, legal requirements on how sick is used versus any other PTO, how it's paid, how it's all these things. So that's why they're often very separate.
Right, and this is where I was asking the question of, that it's a great example of using sick time to backfill at the end of, say, a 20-hour plowing shift. To me, doesn't seem like the right use of sick time. It seems like it's misappropriation of sick time and shouldn't be utilized to save somebody's overtime. I'm not as sure about somebody who wasn't feeling well to come into work on Tuesday, but then ended up, due to staffing shortages, they weren't scheduled to work Friday, but had to come in on Friday anyways because it's mandatory. And I think of, fire and public safety, fire and police, where it's mandatory. We have to put somebody on the road. We need somebody here. But because I was sick on Tuesday, that's still time on the book. So I guess there needs to be a little caveat of how you use it in order to just something to talk about. We're only on our second read. I think
no,
we're
I
going
know.
to see 4 or
We're gonna
5
have a lot of
reads
these.
before we complete this. So it's a,
Yeah.
it's a start of the conversation, not a
Right.
completion of it tonight. Just to be very clear, we're still.
It
Although
could
it
take
seems
us
like we've
2
been
hours
doing
to
it,
talk to one section,
Yeah,
and
I
it
mean,
might
it-
take multiple nights.
just to be clear, while it seems like we're ready to sort of move forward and stamp this because we've been working on it forever, this is still at this level in its infancy. So we're going
Right.
to be working on it for quite some time.
And it's really, I mean, if you will, presented 2 weeks ago. Now we're reading it,
Right.
so it's new
Yeah.
for Bill and I primarily.
Right.
So I just
So-
think that's something we should tease out on what are the triggers and are there acceptable uses of sick time that would not disqualify somebody from getting overtime later on within the same pay period or the work week? Or, and I'm not saying one way or the other, but I'm saying situations like that as opposed to backfilling at the end of a long day. So I think they're two different scenarios.
Did you finish what you wanted to bring up?
Yes.
Before I, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chief, I think, do you still have something to add?
Wait, this is only a first read.
Second, whatever it is. You're welcome to come up in a minute if Glenn's done, but
If
Bill,
I-
before I
So-
chime in on
I was going to say,
overtime.
may I put in one more on overtime?
Absolutely.
And I think the reason I asked that question about, say, a Tuesday and Friday shift speaks directly to Brian's concern. If I'm already scheduled to work 6 days this week, and I know I'm going to get overtime on day 6, but I'm not feeling well on Tuesday, I'm coming in sick. I'm coming in sick because I want my overtime on Saturday. I've already banked it. I already worked my schedule around it. I already knew it was pre-planned overtime. And it doesn't matter that I'm sick. I'm not using my sick time. I'm coming in.
At the end of the day, the department head can send you home. You're sick, you're
That's
not
right.
working
Sure.
today, and I
That's
don't care
right.
if that messes up your
Sure.
overtime or not. You're sick, you don't come in.
Right.
I'm just saying.
And
what
I
the
and I
practice
think
is
we are
gonna
not
be.
good about. This is a general opinion in the workforce, not even Erving specific or
Agreed.
anything. I don't think managers are good about saying, "Go home, you're sick. You're sick. You shouldn't be in the office. You shouldn't be working.
Right.
Preferably not working. Some options they can work from home, whatever it is." But I guess I go to maybe kind of what Brian was getting at around if the pandemic has taught us anything. Hopefully, it's that if people are ill, they should not come to work, not just for them, but for everyone. And unfortunately, it's even more. The potential is a lot higher than it used to be, maybe for what that meant.
Right.
But hopefully, it just reinforces the whole point of sick time. Usually, is to not have sick people at work getting other people sick.
To that point, we even have employees who will, when they truly do call out sick because they're not well, they'll go, "What can I do from home? I'll check messages. I'll respond to citizens," and we have to keep responding back. Your first job is to be sick and stay home. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything else. And so I think it's a cultural issue,
Yeah.
society-wide, but specifically it is happening here where people are not just staying home and focusing on being well. And so we have to fix that culture.
And there's probably a concern somewhere in there about if they're working and then taking sick time, if there's some issue, right?
Agreed.
Because we're having them use time that they were granted,
Right.
and then also they're working, so
Right.
they're not being paid to work.
Right.
There's all this nuance, right? And,
Right.
and it is a societal issue. It's not an Erving issue
No.
alone or solely. It's a societal issue to come to work sick. I mean, that's a, I don't know. I mean, I'm of somewhat of a younger generation than some of my peers in this room right now, and but even I have you go to work and there's a job to be done. It doesn't matter if you're not, halfway incapacitated in bed, whatever, suck it up. And I think that's a
So
business culture issue
I'll
too.
just add my 2 cents to this.
Please.
I think when we start talking about removing things from the FLSA, that we're going down a slippery slope. That's how I feel about it, and I don't think overtime is guaranteed. That it's a right that you have overtime, that you work. Just because you work, that you should have overtime, and if you base your salary on overtime alone, there's something wrong with the system. And sitting here in a managerial position, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna stay with strictly exactly what it says, that you cannot finagle overtime like state troopers do every day so that they make $200,000 a year when their salary is only 80 or 100. I'm gonna stay on the other side, so, all the way through this
Just-
conversation, so.
Are you done? I don't want to cut you off.
Nope,
Okay.
I'm done.
I think when you started, you said when we start taking things away from FLSA, you mean when we start going above and beyond?
Right,
Okay,
right,
I just want to
yeah.
be clear. We're not
Yeah,
doing less
yeah,
than we're
yeah,
required to.
right,
We're doing
right.
more than, right? In theory, okay, or more generous. Sound like you wanted to add something.
I want you all to have as much time with all of this as you need, because I assume that this will take weeks or longer. And I know that these are in-depth conversations, and we've been looking at this for months. I also want to try to understand what revisions you may want to see for your next revisions, or what further research you want done on any of these topics. And so I didn't know if there were, I was going back over my notes, I don't know if there's specific action items that you want to see on this draft or other research that you want. The conversation you're having today.
I think we're hashing that out. I don't think we have an answer for it.
Okay,
I don't
and that's
personally
fine.
have an answer for you yet. Maybe these guys do, but
I do.
you have something for him?
No,
Oh, okay, yeah,
for
no,
me, the
I just
answer
think
is
it's
no,
for
don't-
us to-
Don't touch it, it's fine.
I have just a separate side
Yeah.
note question. You commented that and I'll be honest, I skipped what was in here because you gave us this. So I didn't even look at what your notes were or highlights in here
That's
on
fine.
that.
Yeah.
But you said there's things that were removed, like holiday.
In
From
this current
section,
draft,
for example.
I
So
struck
is there
the word-
anything else in the current draft just that has been struck from the original?
on overtime?
draft?
No.
In the book, in the whole thing?
This current version, there's a few.
And I don't need to know what
Jesus.
they are right now. I just want to know if they
As we're
are,
going
so I
through.
can make sure I update it because I was just working off the printed copy to kind
There-
of keep
Your
consistent notes
PDF
on
version has a few reasonable edits that came out of the meetings that I've had with staff for the last few weeks, like things that like grammatical stuff
what.
or
Okay. Well, I'm not so concerned about
Right.
grammatical, but content.
substantive. The only one on that section was the word holiday.
But there's others within the document. I don't need them right now, but if you come
Just quickly
across
flipping
them, I'd
through.
just like to throw out mine
I got my notes right
later.
here. Yep.
Okay.
So the
I
most
make sure I have them.
current version is in your PDF.
Yeah, but I'm gonna have to.
But I'm gonna
compare
make
'em.
notes as we
So
go
if you
along.
have
I'm gonna call it
If
out
you
to you as
have
we
a
go.
red lined or something I can compare just for a quick reference, because I was trying to keep a single working document with my notes and the
I have a
things
full red line I'll send to you after this meeting,
that,
so you can see every
between
one of them.
this and this. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It's a Word document, so you'll be able to track change everything.
Okay.
Yep.
So anything since the meeting when we got these?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Back to the overtime piece. You don't have to stay if you don't
Okay,
want to. You're
no.
welcome to if you do. But I'm not gonna. I mean, if you want to come back and chime in because we'll probably talk about your concern a little. You're welcome to. I guess it's my turn to weigh in a little bit. I worked hourly when in the private sector. Obviously, the private sector is a little bit different, but I worked when sick time wasn't required on the private sector. You know, pre those laws in Massachusetts, and all time counted towards overtime where I worked in the factory hourly. And so, if you were on vacation, you took a holiday, you took time off, whatever it was, all of that, when you got to 40, everything past that was overtime.
Yeah.
I took 4 days off, worked 3 days, and had an 80-hour week, you know, and then it was 40 hours overtime or whatever that was, right? They have since been taking those things away. Sick time is now exists. It didn't before. You know, there's been changes over the years and over the different companies that have owned us. It is a very employee favorable position. I used to brag about it, if I'm being honest. You know, back when I was that young and paychecks mattered. I mean, paycheck to paycheck, that overtime was huge. Especially around the holidays, you know, a lot of those things for people who are a lot of times in those positions, because unfortunately I think maybe to the point that you didn't bring up, and not that we can solve it, but usually there's a mismatch between what employees are expected to do and how they're compensated and how they can, you know, live off of that. Unfortunately, I just feel like that's a societal issue, not an Erving issue. And it's an even more apparent issue lately. Having experienced it, having seen it both ways, I tend to prefer that most things are counted towards overtime. Because I tend to, I think, feel just like you do, Scott, of that you've earned that time because you've been working. So the idea that that is used and treated any differently than the hours if you were sitting, working, standing in your job, feels like you took something away from that for me. And I say that in terms of holiday and vacation. Not want to understand other leave and personal leave a little more. I would say no. Sick, I don't think it should be. I don't think that that should count. So to me, it's holiday and vacation. If you're taking the time you've earned, and I think we have to probably address
I think comp time.
comp time. Thank you. That's the term I was looking for. I'm like, it's not on here, but what is it? I think comp time should be the same thing
Yeah, that's earned time.
because you've earned the time, right? And maybe that's kind of a little nuance there. Is it's earned? You know, you sick is granted more so. It's not quite really earned in the same way, to me. But I think the issue of when there's an emergency or an event, you know, that there's, I don't know, you know, we had a water main issue, right? And that you just can't just walk away from.
Right.
You have to stay until it's done. When those kind of events happen, people have to work a lot more hours than normal. I get the point that you, I think, are partly making, and Glenn as well, for the employee to feel like, you know, at least I got a little more for all that extra effort because it was mostly overtime, or that extra was overtime, is an important thing. And hopefully it's the exception because we don't have that many events and that isn't what we're expecting our employees to do because it's not healthy to do that regularly. And then on the health and, you know, well-being and safety of our people, when they do that many hours, they should not come back to shift.
Agreed.
There are stipulations on, you know, on the police side on how many hours before you have to have a mandatory rest break. On the other hand, we can mandate it if it's an emergency because that's in the statute you have to work. So it's a little catch-22 because you can go both ways on that. You can violate the very mandate because it's an emergency.
Right.
But when you have the opportunity the next day to say, no, we're not going to come into work in 3 hours and work our normal shifts, as an example, because it's 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. and we start at 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, no, I don't think anyone should be coming in on that team. I don't want to penalize them, but I also don't know the right answer on how we fix that. My issue is I don't think they should come in no matter what. Whether they, and this may be highly unfavorable, whether they're just paid for that shift because we're saying you can't come in. And that's just paid. It's not PTO, it's not sick, it's not leave, it's just given by the town because the decision was made not to have that shift. Or to give an employee the option to use any of their time, including their sick bank, to keep that paid time, or on the emergency basis, the hours worked beyond the normal shift are just paid at overtime no matter how many hours you had that week. That's the only shift you worked. Your normal was 10 and you worked for 18, 8 hours is overtime, and you have a paycheck with 10 and 8 of overtime, or whatever that is, right? I don't know the model that we use. That's where I think we need to, for me, I'd like to, some different ideas on how to approach that.
Would you like me to see how maybe some examples from other towns on how they've addressed this issue?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at.
The last one you just talked about was an example I was going to say is you could eliminate I know FLSA says after 40 hours you trigger overtime. It could be after 8 or your regularly scheduled shift if it's above 8. So, you know, we have a couple of departments that work 10-hour shifts. Anything beyond 10 would trigger overtime.
8 or your normal shift if longer, for example.
And you put a caveat, you know, so it day by day, it's not the 40-hour trigger. It's at the end of your day, if I'm held longer than required, I get overtime for those hours. What happens with the rest of the week has yet to happen. We'll deal with that the next day. If I don't want to work the next day because I work too long, I can burn my time or I can flex it. And I don't have to get overtime. And I can, you know, I'm not required to take the overtime. I can not burn, you know.
Right, I can choose to take a gap on straight time.
Correct. So just
I think that's still, there's an issue for me on on the health and safety piece, like
Sure,
if we should not be
yeah.
having people come in, then how do we deal with that time that they, you know, that they're not allowed to work? That was normally scheduled, and I don't know how we deal with that. I'm not presuming to solve that tonight, but
To create the language that stipulates mandatory downtime, but also trying to acknowledge the overtime work is very tricky. And I'm not sure if you're, requirement to shut down departments and not work because of exigent circumstances, yet still pay, it's, that one paragraph is now going to be 3 pages with all the exceptions.
Which is
Yeah.
maybe what it needs to be.
We're going
I
to work
agree.
on that for a while. If
I
that's,
agree.
if you want to call out all of those exceptions, I think leaving it in the under the discretionary of PTO, obviously excluding sick time, of allowing for the use of time. This doesn't get to the piece of a department head deeming people,
Sure.
unable to work because of how long they were there. I think last winter we had water, wastewater, and highway was out for till 4 or 5 in the morning doing a water main break, and then
they should not be working again at 6.
I saw a lot of them the
But
next day
that's-
back at work, so.
But I think that's not okay, and I think we
Correct.
need to address
And
that
so we
too.
need
And
to
I know they're
address those,
separate,
but I think if you give the option of, hey, flex your time, go take 6 hours off. We're going to work evening tonight. Come if you want, or you can burn your time, or you can, use time.
Right.
So
Come
rather than
in
just
and
take the
have-
day
yeah,
off, let me
yeah,
give
yeah,
you a
okay.
break, and then you can come in, or you can burn your time, and we'll push off the calendar. I think giving some flexibility to the department heads and the staff of how they get there makes sense. But the fact that somebody works long hours, it's justified to say those hours are compensated a little more than regular time. It feels like a disservice to say, thank you for working 22 hours straight, and we're not going to pay you any additional. We're going to tell you to go home, and that was just straight time. To me, that's
that's the biggest one I have the issue with.
yeah, and that's any department. That's
Yeah.
wastewater dealing with water main breaks or issues with alarms that they can't. Another July 18th happens and they're down there at the plant. Knock on, find some wood that never happens again. But you could go across the board on any of our public works, public safety departments. There are times that they have to work longer, and anytime they're beyond their regularly scheduled hours, should be time and a half. We should figure out how to make that compensated, regardless of what happened the other days that they worked. So,
I tend
The
to feel
the language
same
of how we
way,
get
and-
there, I'm not sure. We'll have to work on that. But
Right. I feel more strongly about that happening, finding a way to do that and acknowledge that, than whether or not we include regular vacation and PTO towards overtime. Like, if we do that, that's more important to me than whether or not we include that. This is nice too, but to me, compensating them at time and a half for those exigent hours that they had to work
Yeah.
is important in a different way.
I will research options.
And I think I like what you brought up, and I should have thought of that. So I've seen that before too, where there's just a mandatory period after you can't come back. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's 8 hours from whatever 4 a.m. Fine, but you can come in at noon if you
I'll
want.
see you at
work your
noon. You
shift,
can work
right,
noon.
right,
You can
noon
work
to
from noon
whatever.
until 10 p.m. if you want.
Right,
There's work to
right,
do. It may,
right.
it might be clerical work.
I'm not
It's
saying you can't come in. I'm saying you can't come in for a rest
8
period,
hours.
and I think
or
that's
you can
important.
burn your time and not come in at all, and I'll see you the next day.
Absolutely, yeah. That's your choice. Yeah. So.
All right.
Okay.
Well, we got
and
the
that
2
gets
points.
rid of. Well, that gets rid of the. To me, I think I'm hoping that gets rid of.
Page 6 of what?
30.
33 or
And
something?
we only really talked about page 6.
I know.
We didn't get to 6. Does that address, though, just to kind of close that a little bit, does that address, if we did it, and I understand where you were at, and I welcome your thoughts too, but if we figure out a way to compensate overtime for those unusual circumstance hours outside of the norm at overtime, does that take away any concerns you had about excluding sick from the overtime calculation?
Yeah, so
Because you
yes.
said there's the nuance
Yeah,
piece,
there's the
right?
nuance. I think backfilling with sick time goes against the use of sick time as we wrote it in the policy. So
But using sick to calculate overtime isn't necessary to get overtime for that extra work
correct.
now,
Because
in that idea.
In that idea, the fact that somebody was sick on Tuesday, but they worked 22 hours on Wednesday,
They still work 12 or
they still
14
work
hours of overtime on
12 to
Wednesday.
14 hours over their shift on that day, and we should figure out a way, language that allows them to be compensated for that extra hours.
The other example you brought up was I have scheduled overtime on Saturday, and I'm sick on Wednesday,
Right,
but I come in anyway.
because I don't want to,
So I don't know if we also figure out in there about scheduled overtime, because that's scheduled overtime, if you will.
True.
Because before you were sick, it was known that would be overtime.
right.
So maybe that's a nuance to fix
and
that
maybe
one.
that's a nuance where
I don't
if
know,
it's
but-
scheduled within, maybe it has to be scheduled with somebody else, or I don't know, or maybe it doesn't change.
But the only other thing I'd be careful of is if you're sick the day before your overtime and you come in for your overtime, I'm not okay with that, especially
Correct.
if you're still sick. So
Yeah.
that, those are,
And I think that's the part you were worried about.
Right.
Somebody's sick on Friday and they're scheduled for overtime on Saturday, and they're like, I'm not giving up my overtime. I'm sick
That's what
today,
I'm
but I'm going to
concerned
be
about.
better tomorrow. And
That's
so
what I'm concerned about.
there is some concern there. I don't want people that are sick coming into work. So
Because then you have the entire workforce that now is subjected to it,
yes,
and now they all
And
may
now-
be sick.
and when you have small workforce already,
That puts the
it's-
whole department at jeopardy.
yeah.
right.
So I'm in agreement on that. It's just a matter of how we tease that out.
Right. Okay.
So let's,
Gentlemen, just real quick, can I say something?
if you come up here,
I would just.
Chief,
To Brian's point,
just so you can get caught on the mic,
Yeah.
Chief, please.
just real quick, just because I have the thought in my head, to Brian's point, I'm for vacation time being paid out, I'm for sick time being paid out, if it's not the same day type thing, for law enforcement. To Brian's point, I don't want people to
Paid-
say,
Hang on, paid out? What? I don't follow.
towards your
Counting
paid
towards
time.
overtime.
Yep.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
in favor of counting
I'm
towards.
in favor of what
okay,
you
I got
gentlemen are
I got
saying.
I got you.
To Brian's point, and to what we just were talking about, I have an overtime shift Saturday. I'm going to call out Friday, so I'm well rested for my overtime shift. Or I really am sick, but I'll be okay to come in Saturday for my overtime. I think we could just simply word it that you're not eligible for overtime until you are back to your normal scheduled shift.
Yeah. I've seen
that
I was
before.
gonna
I've
say, I've
seen
seen that you
language where
can't-
the
you
day
can't come
before
in.
and the day after, in order,
That's
for like
yeah,
details.
eligibility for all kinds of
And
stuff.
if that's a
for a
way
lot
that
of
we
things.
can get around the still being able to use the sick time, I think that's,
Right.
it kind of tries to resolve the issue of people abusing sick time to work overtime, but it also isn't hurting people if they are sick on a Tuesday and they do have overtime on a Wednesday, on a Friday
Like a
or a
Friday or
Saturday, and they've already
Saturday.
come back to work Wednesday, Thursday type
Right,
thing.
right.
So I
Yeah,
just,
no, I
Yeah.
appreciate that, and I agree. I've seen the same.
I've seen it for
Sometimes for
details.
eligibility, for holiday times, for overtimes, things like that. Because the very idea you don't want them to abuse it, or come in sick.
Right.
So yeah, I think that
Good point.
language would be
Thank
helpful
you.
too.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
So, and just to be clear, I know you said you're in favor of it too, and I said, I like it. We haven't decided we are or aren't including
No, I
it.
know.
Just there is still disagreement at the table on that one, and I don't want to assume we are going to come to a consensus or a majority decision. We're not there yet, to me. So,
No,
Wh-
quite a bit more discussion to
Yeah,
have.
so we'll flesh some more of that out with some ideas around, I think what Chief brought up is also around teasing out overtime and not eligibility around sick time. And
And some language around mandatory time off after
yeah,
extreme circumstances.
and whether that belongs, that doesn't belong in overtime,
It
but I
won't-
think
yeah,
there's a mandatory
It may need to be
after
somewhere
some
else in
number
here.
of worked hours that
it may
no matter how
reference-
far beyond that it goes,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
going to be off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It probably belongs in this Article 1 of sort of the work environment and schedules.
just not.
I just don't know what it's called yet, but
Yeah.
but I think maybe we borrow some of the language from the practice in the police department around safe work
Yeah, mandatory.
timeframes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll bring that back and we'll continue the conversation on the overtime part.
Yep.
Okay.
Payroll and timekeeping, or are you
Well,
moving on?
hang on. No, I just want to take a real quick look here.
Make sure we're not.
So just for the sake of the employees who are here tonight, are all of you staying for all the discussion about the personnel policy regardless? Or are you all not necessarily here, you're here for other business we haven't gotten to? Both here, okay. Mariah, I'm sorry?
I'm here for other things.
She has other
Okay.
business.
So would the board be open to
Pausing.
pausing on this topic, moving to Mariah's? Let her get out of here at a reasonable hour? Because I would like you to, but doesn't mean we will. And then we'll come back to this after?
Yep.
Does that work? All right, Mariah, would you come join us? You already said you were here for both, so
Yeah.
too bad for you.
You must have misspoke.
I didn't see that in the policy. Where am I jumping down to? Water? No.
No,
That's Brian's
that's what it
tonight.
says.
Very end.
The very last one, right?
I am going to
Those
stick around
last
for
two.
the water conversation too. So
You are? I thought so.
Yeah.
That's why.
That's my main thing.
yeah,
All right, well,
We'll
let's,
go 1, 2, 3.
let's go to that. Yeah, basically. Discussion regarding Erving Center water.
Grab a
You
chair.
can join us.
Come
You
on
can
up.
sit over there, sit over here, wherever you
Yeah,
want.
you can be on camera over there too.
Nope, the camera's not going to catch you if you.
Yeah, I thought you were going to stop over there. I was going to say it, and then you didn't, so I stopped paying attention to it. Yeah, there it is.
16.
So hopefully the memorandum gives you a high level of what we're trying to bring to the attention of the three of you. The topic of a public water supply for Erving Center is not a new topic. I think some of the conversations that we've got on record date all the way back to the 60s, where the town has contemplated whether or not they wanted to explore this option. The most recent time before this conversation was 2014, where there was some preliminary discussion around what a proposal to do the engineering work. To be very clear, the chances of siting a well in Erving Center is very different than siting it in Erving side. The soil composition, the aquifer, all of the things that exist here may not exist in the Erving Center area. With that being said, I think it's a very real concern that if we don't contemplate whether or not this town wants to pursue one, we may or may not be deciding the future of Erving Center as a commercial and residential area. As properties have trouble with their wells and or cannot meet the licensing requirements for a public water supply, it will likely determine whether or not that parcel can continue to be used. And those are just real considerations. So I think we bring this back to you because the FRCOG did a listening session with representatives of our legislature and the governor's office and DP. Mariah had just been hired when the
Yeah,
three of us
3
went
years
down to
ago.
that. So 3 years ago, we went down and participated in that conversation in Whately. As a result, the FRCOG was given money to study this issue, and they conducted that study last year. And I think at the time we let you know that it was just happening. The results came out this summer, and it was an evaluation of all the existing infrastructure, both wastewater and water in the county, and potential locations that should be prioritized for new infrastructure. And Erving Center was identified as an area that should be considered for new infrastructure, specifically on water. So we bring this forward to you to say, the study's done. It confirmed that we should look into this if we want to keep this as our commercial and residential hub. There is funding coming out of the federal government for infrastructure like water. So timing-wise, this may make sense. So that's the high level of the conversation.
Anything either of you would like to add before we ask questions?
I would just add that it's a little bit challenging to get something like this in line for budgeting purposes. Just because if we do this in the next 6 months, if we do all of this research, it would have been nice to have a request in for next year, but we don't have a price to put in right now, and so it's hard. It would be nice. I guess what I'm saying is, if we find a site for a well, I don't know how the timing will work to wait until the next budget process for FY25. And that's just one of my concerns. That's not really anything in particular that we can solve tonight. Right. But I guess I'm just bringing it to your attention that with money potentially flowing quickly down from the federal government, that there might be an opportunity in between fiscal years to have grant funding or advantageous borrowing that could make this happen if we even find a site. There's a lot of ifs that kind of, there's a lot of questions, and I think that this will answer step one of those many questions.
Right. I was gonna say, if we even want to pursue it, or if we even
Right.
find a site and then want to do one.
Yes. Right.
And I was going to say, just thinking personally, I'm not sure I'm ready at a point to even make that decision, or even close to. And there's a lot of other projects that I think we would probably prioritize first that are coming up. But if it's grant funding, it's a whole different challenge. So I think it's a fair point. So.
And I would just echo what Brian said about having a concern for the future of Erving Center. And I think if that's a conversation with residents that I don't know is necessarily on the top of people's minds unless they've already had trouble with their well. It's not something you think about as a homeowner until there's a problem. But as a business owner, I know that all of our business owners are concerned about it in Erving Center because they're in charge of operating their public water supply for their business. And so I think that maybe that's a conversation that we need to bring people together to have, is are people even interested in going this direction? And if not, are they prepared to potentially see a lack of business in Erving Center in the future? And I think that's a really hard discussion to have, but I think it's the reality that we're in.
Correct.
Can I ask a question on that thread, Pete?
Sure.
Generally, I would assume, regardless of whatever a water rate is it fair to say a business owner having to keep compliant being a public water supply with a well is much more costly
Yes,
than just paying as a user rate?
correct.
Yeah, okay. I assumed, but I wanted to make
Yeah.
sure my assumption
Yes.
was fair. Yeah. Okay.
So I just had one question. In the paragraph that came out of the study, 21, am I reading a typo there that the anticipated projected cost is 16.8 million? Okay.
And that's why I
And then
also
it was
included.
$4 million in 2014
Right, so
estimated
this is
probable
not getting
cost?
cheaper.
So we are 8 years removed and quadrupling the cost.
Well, I'm curious.
Well, and that was-
without looking at that whole study, I knew there was a lot done. Is the site's reference to get to that cost different between the two studies? Because
were-
the difference between bringing water from somewhere already like near the center of town versus like Swamp Road,
So-
that's a lot more cost.
So to be clear, the locations looked at are different than what we talked about before. We were still looking at town-owned property, so it wasn't a proposal at the time to acquire new property.
Okay.
The question is about how far can the lines reach without adding additional pump stations. And so say there was viability to the site on Mountain Road, if that worked, the parcel that you own. The gravity feed would provide enough pressure in theory to allow us to get to certain sections of Erving Center that you may otherwise need a pump station to facilitate.
Got it.
Whereas if we had something that was down in the lower part of the village, everything else would be a conversation about, does it make sense to pump uphill, right? And so I do think that there's some strategy with some of that. So there's probably more pipe potentially proposed in the new study, because one of our potential sites would be on Mountain Road, and if that was viable, I mean, you have probably a 2-mile run down Mountain Road just to get down to the village, and the opportunity to connect to homes along that route.
Right.
Another option that was mentioned in 2014 and is mentioned again is there's always an option to potentially purchase from another community like Orange, if that was something that the town wanted to pursue. So that's another question that could be explored, but until you know whether or not we have a viable site, it doesn't, how do you even have that conversation? And we'd still be required to provide all of the infrastructure to the connection, so.
And really, obviously, this feeds a bigger conversation, but really tonight it's a question of, do we want to pay for a study to see if any of the parcels that were looked at that we own
Right.
are viable for a well?
Correct.
And then just to have that knowledge and decide if we do ever someday, whatever, go from here, regardless of probable cost and how we get there, we know we do or don't have that solution. We do or don't have a site that's available.
Correct.
And that might inform what we do with those parcels down the road.
Right.
Right.
Because if they have some use, do we keep them versus not keeping them? If they don't serve any other purpose.
Correct.
So it's a big, it's a probably, hopefully not 17, maybe more than $17 million and a lot of resident impact and questions issue. But really right now it's do we want to spend $7,700 on understanding if any of our parcels could even do this?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to separate the two, minimize it a little bit, because
Yeah.
I think we could talk about mandatory hookup, optional, do people
Yeah.
want it, do they not, who's in the conversation, there's a lot of pieces.
It's a perfect clarification, and it goes back to what Mariah was talking about in terms of all the potential opportunities and some misalignments, but we can't even have any of those higher level conversations until we do this initial
To
Yeah.
find out.
If we
inquiry.
have a valid source.
Right.
Right.
Well,
And there's so
and-
many potential paths and like, I don't know, stages that we could take, depending on what funding was there, especially if it's not out of our pocket and we were interested, so,
Right.
Yeah.
but not knowing.
Right.
I personally never like doing a study without having at least an idea of where that might go, but I think in this case, there's not really an idea of where that can go without doing this study.
Yeah.
Right.
And like we might find, oh yeah, there's absolutely like the water table is great up there, that will work, and that totally changes this conversation. Whereas if we find out like there's no hope, we would have to connect to Orange. Like
Right.
that's,
Right.
you know, and I don't know that we're definitely going to get,
Or pipe it from
That-
the other side of town.
Right.
yeah. I don't know how
Yeah, there you
definite
go.
this will
Pipe
be.
it, pipe it
Go
right,
right
over
by
the mountain.
Farley and everybody will get
put
it.
a pump-
Lots of ideas.
Put a couple of pumping stations along the way. We'll just store it and pump it and get it over the mountain, and there you go. Feed
I
it
was
down.
gonna say, once you get up,
Once you get to
Farley,
the top,
there's a
you
lot of pressure back in the center probably.
But knowing whether or not we actually have a viable source is important.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that for the cost, this will give us that information to just move forward with.
Yep.
Do we have funding? Did I miss that? I know, that's always,
smile says it
I
all,
ask it
bro.
all the
No.
time. Where's
Do I
the
have an
funding coming
exact
from?
funding source on this particular project? No. But do I believe that we have the capacity within our budget to identify it? Yes. So
In the current fiscal year.
correct. It's a few $1,000s. This is not
Well,
a massive study. This is something that's very specific, very targeted, with a very clear deliverable to report back to you on.
I was going to say, does this qualify to come out of water enterprise?
I mean, I think you can make the argument either way. It would be if this was a project that people wanted to go down, I would argue that this should be an expansion of the water department, and therefore it would
It
do
would
that.
come out of that.
If it's at this exploratory phase, I think you
Probably
could try
not.
to make an argument either way.
Okay.
It's not technically a water department function at this time.
Right, it's exploratory on our
Right.
behalf. Okay.
But it could be the water department
But it could.
exploring, expanding. So
Yeah,
I get you.
yeah.
We don't have a capital line anymore when we were looking at that the other day in water, right? Okay. So that 10K is not there. It was a wastewater thing, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
I am in favor of
yeah.
at least doing the study because, given I don't want to see the center of town a decade, 2 decades from now, you find out one parcel at a time no longer becoming viable, businesses closing, parcels not being able to be resold because there's no viable water for that parcel. I'd like to stop that from happening if we could and start that process for $7,700 to at least get the ball rolling to find out if we can locate a water source. We can figure out the rest of the pieces after that.
in another 8 or 10 years, that 4 to 17 will be 50.
Yeah.
If we don't at least think about it.
Yep.
The other project, not for a reason to do it or not do it, we likely will have to do some infrastructure work if it was to happen on Route 2. And we are simultaneously starting the planning process with MassDOT on what Route 2 improvements need to be made.
Right.
And so at some point, they will do that, and that may be an opportunity to align projects, if it was to happen, and make some infrastructure improvements before they put a moratorium on cutting into the pavement, sort of like we did on the sewer. So,
And if we ever want to redevelop Usher Mill, this would be a necessity.
right,
And then also the added fire protection would be huge.
right.
Yeah, I saw that in there too, for sure.
Who knows? Maybe
Sounds
we'll
like
do
there's a
some
lot of ifs, but,
maybe
and
we'll
I'm
go back
only
to
say
finding
that
more
to
federal
say.
money like they did years ago when they were putting in water
Well, I
and
think
wastewater.
that's, I think that's what Mariah is alluding to. There's a
Yeah.
lot of federal money and a lot of it's around infrastructure, and so
Yeah.
that could potentially fund something. And that's a lot of money, and if that's funding it, I don't know, 90%, we'll talk about like wastewater treatment and stuff, 95%, it's a
Yeah.
lot more palatable than 100% ours, so.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think the more ready we can be for that, the better.
Right.
Whether it's this project or any of our other infrastructure projects, we should just be, if there's things we want to get done within the next 5 years, be as ready to go as possible, so that if there is money for it, we can say, yes, we're first in line.
Right.
Some conversation somewhere, I think you said it, but the being as, you know, it wasn't break ground ready, but having everything ready to go to start, like all the preliminary work's done on a project to say we can take it off the shelf and start going, gets us in a much better position in grants. And I am much of the fan if we can spend a little bit of money to put enough information on the shelf that someday we can go, yep, we're ready to do it and we want to. It's much better than being
It's a
like,
tricky
I think it'd be
balance.
nice to have a well. Where should we put that?
Right.
Can we get that grant?
Yeah.
You're never gonna, you know.
It's a tricky balance to not do it too soon so that those numbers then expire and not having it at all.
Well, you can refresh numbers. I'm less concerned
Yes,
about
but
refreshing
having at least
numbers
an
if you don't
idea.
even have a design and a concept and a,
Yes.
and a direction that you want to go someday, potentially, so. Anyway, so is there a motion on a contract with,
Is it tie and bond?
No.
no, it's Hydro Source Associates, PC?
So moved.
I'll make a motion that we engage Hydro Source Associates, PC, for well siting services as described in their proposal dated October 28th, 2022, for a fixed sum of $7,700.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Depending on weather, I think their deliverable was 4 weeks after approval,
Right.
so we may have that in short order
Right.
by the new year.
Right.
Could I just add, you know, I think this is a good project, and having a residential property in there, I know there's a whole lot of other issues that residents would be concerned with when we start talking about spending for a water supply. But I do know that in our area, there have been failures of well systems, and I'm just wondering, that's information that we need and that we should start collecting and establishing where they are and what the issues are, because when we have this larger conversation, it's going to come up.
I can work with the Board of Health on that,
Okay.
because the residential wells have to be permitted, and if they need to be altered, that goes through the Board of Health process. So I can get that
I think
to you.
it's a good idea to have that information ready to
Yeah,
go for these
it is.
conversations. I think you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, just compiling
Yep,
these are the challenges,
Yeah.
businesses too. I mean, Usher, I think we
yeah,
knew we took a path because of the well that was there, but we know what that
Mhm.
also means down the road. So,
Right.
Good. And some people have had to do work,
mhm.
and they may be back to usable well today, but
Yep.
they weren't at one time. So
Yeah.
Right.
it's a good idea.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Good on the water supply? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll just go through it since we're right here. Review of the professional services agreement with the FERCog, Franklin Regional Council of Governments for procurement assistance. So Brian, you put together a memo looking at engaging Franklin Regional County the FERCog for words are escaping me tonight. FERCog for procuring trade contracts.
So we'd like
So
to.
we have them kind of on, I won't say retainer, but we have a contracted, we can call them when we need them because it's already been procured.
Right.
For a period of time instead of needing to go out every time we have a job,
Correct.
no matter, well, reasonably large or small.
Correct. Yeah, this would not take place or take the, it would not cover something like a renovation of a building or a large-scale project. We would still treat that as a standalone issue, but maintenance.
This is, I need to call because something's broken, it needs to get fixed.
Because right now,
And we
it's,
need
every time is a
contractor,
different
and
procurement.
It's not,
I think of calling Jamrog for the, just any
Mm-hmm.
one thing.
or an electrician to look at a streetlight or, whatever that is.
It slows the town down on its response by weeks, sometimes months, depending on the complexity of a project. If you have to go out and do the advertisements and have site walks and collect bids and do that evaluation. So the proposal would be that FERCog does not have extensive experience doing this because they've only done this once before. It was for a collaborative of school departments that wanted to try this, and they didn't use the contract enough to keep it going. So we're the first town to ask to do this. The state has a contract like this, but many of the providers are not in Franklin County.
Local.
So through conversations with Glenn and some other department heads, we would like to explore this, and the electrician services are the services that we need the most right now. So we'd like to start with that contract, get our brains around how this works, try the process and see if we learn something from that experience before we do the others. And so if COG is willing to go down this road with us and help us do this one, because it's new and they don't really have a template in place, they'd have to build all of that from scratch. So this procurement or this engagement of their services is a little higher than what we're normally accustomed to, and that's because this is going to be a learning experience for all of us. But I do think it's going to be a cost-saving measure in the long run.
That's the 2,000.
Maybe the $2,000 for their fee.
Question on that, item A is a rate of 80 per hour. One's going to be actual, billed actual, up to
It's
not
always
to
billed
exceed
actual, yep.
2,000. It says the rate includes fringe costs, so it's not in addition, not T&E.
No, so they
It's 80 encompassing, inclusive?
they were 75 before, so it has gone up. But this program, to my understanding, is a fee-for-service program, and so all the costs are within
Inclusive.
the project.
Okay, all right. Yeah. I normally don't see not plus T&E.
For COG does
That's fine.
they've been a fantastic resource for us in the past, and they've only ever billed us for their actual time used.
Yeah, of course.
So, yep.
Okay. I don't have any questions or concerns.
None.
None. Do you have a motion for that?
If you wouldn't mind.
Please.
Make a motion to authorize Town Administrator Brian Smith to enter into an agreement with the FERCog for procurement of on-call electrician services, not to exceed $2,000 budget. I don't know what else you need in there.
It's good.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Discussion regarding planning department name and liaison.
I put in a memo respectfully requesting the name of the department that we just created change from Department of Planning, which I think confuses residents, to community planning, which, while it's not perfect, I think it would offer a slight differentiation. I had considered community development, which is what some towns have, but I think it would be confusing to have a town planner in a community development office, and I don't know that my role is entirely community development either. So I think it's just a little less confusing to just keep it planning, but add the word community in there. And I think that really does describe what I do, is community planning.
And your request is to change the department name, but not your title.
Right, so I would still be a town planner in the Department of
Not a
Community
community
Planning.
planner or town community planner.
Just changing and on the website, it is confusing. If you're not familiar with the nuances and you go to click on planning, thinking you're going to the planning board, and now you're at Mariah's link, and I wanted the planning board, where are they? So,
Yeah,
Well, I think the rule before it was a department was confusing between that and the planning board at times anyway.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think it just, yeah,
Yeah.
it came to my mind minute after we did it.
a minute too late.
I was like, somebody else solve this, please, thank you. 'Cause it is confusing, and I don't know the right answer either. Any thoughts, concerns?
I don't have any
I
concerns.
have no concern.
Just to clarify, Department of Community Planning, right, I think it works. If we have to run it for a year and look at it again.
yeah, I think we kind of just see what
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Well, and as other towns are doing more of this, maybe one of them will have inspiration that we didn't on how to differentiate a planning board and a planning department. And
Yeah, and
we
I
don't have an
think,
EDC, we're not that big yet, so.
yeah, in some places they have an office of community development and then they have a planning office, and those are two separate things. Where, unless something drastically changes, we are never going to be a town that has two different departments. And I was like, does it make sense to have my position be town planner / community developer? But that just seems clunky, and I think that my job description encompasses aspects of that anyways. Yeah, this is my best shot right now.
I think it works.
I think we're good with it.
Okay.
If you have another idea and inspiration, let us know. We're open to it. Do we need a motion to formalize that?
It's up to the three of you.
You are welcome to rename your department as
Yes.
presented.
Thank you, sir.
Adjust
So moved.
Adjust the website.
Yep. And discussion regarding request to establish public art gift fund.
Wait, what about the liaison?
Liaison real quick.
Because I was gonna
Moved on
ask.
so quickly. Sorry.
I was going to volunteer for that one. I actually pulled up the appointments for this year. I have 3 of mine that just never, they're non-existent. They don't meet. I have the capacity to take on one more, unless somebody else has a burning desire.
Burning desire to do that.
Be Mariah's liaison in the Department of
Oh.
Community Planning. So Scott's volunteering unless you have a burning desire. I don't know how you come back to that, even if you were interested, but anyway. I have a burning desire to let you do it.
Well, I just,
Not a reflection on you, Mariah, just a capacity issue.
you know, I mean, half of mine, town clerk, town moderator, those liaison appointments don't really take a whole lot of my time.
I move that Scott is appointed as the liaison to the Department of Community Planning.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Now, discussion regarding request to establish a public art gift fund. Your mic.
It's back on.
Okay, got it. I heard it was out for a little bit.
Yeah, it fell off. It was sitting on the floor.
I missed you
no.
fixing that.
I
But
saw
okay,
him
we
stand
already
up, and I went, "Yeah, I think that's me."
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry.
I'm
public art gift
requesting the creation of a public art gift fund, which we could have First Light sign to have the remainder of the heron sculpture money transferred to. There's $361.21 left in that grant, and I've checked with First Light, and they've unofficially given me permission to move that, but I wanted the creation of the gift account, and then I could have them sign something that actually states which account it's being moved to. And then this would be in place for future public art projects. So if someone wanted to donate funds for a mural we have in the future, or whatever we decide to do, they could say, they could either put in for just general art or say specifically, I want it to go towards this project.
That was going to be my question. Gift funds, usually you can do a directed donation to a specific thing, or it's an open donation to
Just a general
whatever's
fund.
happening.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. And we can establish this ourselves, because it's not.
Gift funds
So
are
it's
up
in
to
our
the 3 of you.
purview, yeah.
Yep. So as long as I discussed this with Debbie, as long as there's a vote from the select board that authorizes the establishment of it, she'll set it up in the accounting system.
Questions, concerns?
None.
I'll make a motion that we establish a public art gift fund for the town of Erving.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Simple.
Absolutely.
I like
And
simple.
I think we all agree with your plan to ask First Light to move their funds into it, just for clarity. All right, with that, it is 8:48. Would we like, make a motion, we take a 10-minute recess, resume at 9 p.m.? Not for long, not for all night, just
Just
for a
little bit.
premise, but resume at that point, and so
You want a motion?
that's a motion. I
Second.
move that we take a recess, resume at 9 p.m.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We'll be back at 9.
I was laughing because I didn't notice.
Are we good, sir?
I
Thank
didn't
you.
notice. I didn't.
Welcome back to the select board meeting for 11:28, resuming at 9:06 PM. First topic as we come back here, meeting minutes of September, wait a second, which one did I have here?
November 14th.
November 14th, yes,
November,
thank
yeah.
you. Yep, September we're going to pass over.
Make a motion to accept meeting minutes of Monday, November 14th, 2022, as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The eighth water commitment for FY '23.
Give me 1 second. Make a motion that we approve the eighth water commitment of FY '23 in the amount of $57.59 for final charges, 13 Gun Street.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Review of the Family and Medical Leave Act Policy Draft, first read. Any thoughts? I know it's a first read. Set for now?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Yeah.
Okay. Activities Coordinator Search Committee. What was that? 12. Here we go. So we're preparing the search for the part-time activities coordinator that we've been discussing, the senior and community center. And the thoughts are between a 3 and 5 member committee first. You know, what were we looking to have for the screening?
Well, I know I'm on that committee, so
Or you probably will be.
will be, yes. I think I would have a preference because I think this should be considered a serious look at a candidate, so I don't want it to feel canned.
By going 5 versus
Right,
3, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I understand. I think no matter what we've defined it as today, the potential is that may be much more in the long run someday. Who knows? I mean, as
Yeah.
things increase. Scott, you good with it?
Yeah, I'm fine with the 5.
Okay. And then the recommendation was that the committee begin with the director.
Benefited position.
Well, before that, just the committee. The membership include Director Paula Betters, Becky Pacherik, and yourself, Bill.
Yeah.
And then if we were going for a larger committee, the recommendation was possibly for 2 patrons of the senior center. Or we could do 2 citizens just in general, not necessarily.
I'd rather say 2 citizens in general.
That was,
I mean, I don't really care where they're from, but I don't want to exclude the general population. And 1 and 1.
yeah, I was going to say, I tended to feel the
Yeah.
same way, but I understand that the input of people who regularly,
Right. Right.
come here and participate in things is also good. Maybe we can say we'd likely have some preference for at least one of those members to be
Yeah.
someone who frequents the center,
Yeah.
but would consider all candidates. Because we're going to have to put it out there to the public, obviously. So.
Well, you have it, yeah, I'd say split it.
Preferences for at least one candidate to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
a regular senior center attendee.
Attendee.
Yeah,
And then any
And
other
then-
resident at large. you know.
right, and yeah, it is open to citizens in general. And if it can be more, if we don't have a patron who's interested, then we would take
Right,
2
then it would
citizens.
be
So
2,
it's
right,
not,
yeah.
yeah, it's not necessarily fixed to
But
that.
giving the option of basically a right of first refusal of
Right,
current
right.
patron of the center to be able to say they would like to participate.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. So.
Do you want that as a motion with a charge and everything, or do we need one?
I mean, to be the preliminary screening committee is the charge. I mean, we do need a motion to create it and appoint people to it. If you want to do that, you can.
Sure, I'll make a
Okay.
motion to create a preliminary screening committee for the activities coordinator, and to be comprised of Director Paula Betters, Becky Pachurik, Selectman Bembury, and 2 additional members, with preference of one of those 2 being an active patron of the senior center.
Second.
And just to ensure it's clear, that's establishing it as 5-member and appointing those said people
Yes.
and the future ones when they arrive or when we have those letters of interest. Do we want to set a timeline for how long we're going to put it out there for interest?
What's the timeline? I mean, we'd like to get this.
Yeah, Brian, can I bother you on that one? So the activities coordinator
Yep.
screening, what is the timeline on putting the advertisement out and getting them back? Are we having that
I'd
back
like
in
to-
December or are we having it back in January?
I'd like to advertise the end of this week. 2 weeks is probably too short. 3 weeks puts us right up against the sort of the time off periods at town hall, so that could impact receipt of things. So
January, first week in January?
at this point, it may make sense just to wait till the first week of January. And then
I
that
say,
way,
I feel like you're on the 25th, 30th, or the
Yeah.
4th, 5th, or something, right? Because
and
the
depending on
holidays on
people's
both
time off
weekends.
schedules and stuff, you just sort of hit this period of time through the month of December where people may not even be looking at help ads and
Well,
feeling
and
like
most
they
people
can.
start looking again in January. It's you gotta finish
Right.
the year somewhere and move on. And I'm asking just because we were, the motion on the table is to establish the screening committee and have it be 5-member and appoint the 3 recommended members, and then have a 2 for citizens,
Okay.
with a preference for 1 being a patron, should we get that
Okay.
response. So how long would we have to put that out there, just knowing we'd have a deadline to create this once we have
So we'd have at
applications?
least 4
So we have a
weeks.
lot of time.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
all right. So I think we should close that either at the same time or sooner, because we're going to want to establish that in our first meeting.
Right.
The remaining members.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely want to have that in place by January 9th, so some due date before January 9th, right? Is that actually it must be our scheduled meeting, I just haven't even looked.
I think it is.
It should be January 9th.
Yeah,
Okay. If it's not, we should meet.
it will be.
Okay. So sometime before, I know you'll probably put it out there for either end of December for interested citizens.
Yeah, and then
Yeah. Okay. So just an amendment to say, and letters of interest would be due in December, by the end of December?
Yep.
you can do Friday the 30th.
Perfect. And there was already a second? Or was there not? I don't recall. No?
Second.
There you go, there is now.
Perfect. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'll update you on the other items. We already did the meeting minutes and the water commitment and the family medical leave.
Thank you.
I'll
We
update
got
you
that
after.
for you.
Thank you.
We have the unexpected business that was submitted to us by the treasurer. Thank you for pointing that out,
Real
Scott.
quick, did you deal with the second question on the activities coordinator?
No, we did not. Thank you for reminding me, because
Okay.
I stopped Bill when he brought it up because I wanted to finish the committee establishment,
Oh, yeah.
and I forgot to go back.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. The question about benefited.
Yep.
So it was planned as a 19-hour position unbenefited, and the director is wishing to change that to a 20-hour benefited employee.
I am in favor. I don't see any reason not to.
I think given your comment that you said earlier, in the future, I think this position grows
Yeah,
as the need of the department grows, and it
I
just
agree.
makes sense to get in front of that now.
I didn't expect somebody to use that until like the future.
It is the future. It's about 8 minutes past since you said it.
Touche.
So,
Okay. So you're saying you're in favor as well?
I'm fine, yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I'm either way. You're saying we have the budget capacity for this year, but that's a budget increase for next year.
It would be a budget increase. Jennifer and I, when we budget, we always try to put a cushion in there because life events do happen throughout the year and people need to change plans. So I had to go back, double check what we've been billed to date for the first 5 months of the fiscal year. And so if we continue with this track, we have capacity.
But just knowing that that is taking on a whatever, approximately $20,000 additional burden next year that we did
Potentially.
not
Depending if this
budget
person,
shift.
if this person
But we can't
decides to
budget
avail
that way.
themselves. Right.
We budget with
Agreed.
capacity, so if we feel taken some capacity, we're going to budget with another capacity.
Agreed.
Yep.
Yep.
Forward, so. Okay.
Okay
Do you
to
need-
advertise?
so-
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. I don't need the vote unless
Okay,
you want to.
so we're okay with 20 hours and benefited.
Okay. I will advertise it that way.
Okay. You got me thinking if it should be 24, but anyway, moving on.
Oh, we can.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to consider that right now. I think if we have someone in the position, the director looks at that. How does it work? And it makes sense. I was
gonna
thinking as
say-
a half day work. Maybe it's great to have a half day. Maybe it's not. I just don't know what that's
Yeah.
going to be.
I say
It's too
get-
preemptive because I don't know what the scheduling is going to look
Correct.
like. And
Correct.
Right.
yeah, I just like round numbers. I get into that. Like that's a whole.
You like 3 whole days.
That's what I'm thinking, but it may not be. It might be a bunch of half days. So I don't. I
Could
don't
be
want to
5
presume.
4-hour days.
Exactly. So I don't want to presume what will work.
Right.
And I'm sure the director will bring that to us if
Yes.
that's of an interest or need in the future. So, okay. So now we've dealt with it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Scott, for bringing up the unexpected business here. That's If you want to start, I haven't read it. So, or Brian, if you
want me to
want to bring
explain
it
it?
up, if you know
We're,
enough
we're,
about
we're
it,
looking
I
for a
don't.
general permission from the select board. So the question has arisen throughout the last month or two about whether or not the town wants to explore other dental offerings. We currently have a plan that's offered through the Hampshire Trust. While it provides dental and vision coverage, there's some employees who've had trouble with the insurance and wonder if there's other plans that would cover more. So the interest is not to reduce benefits. The interest is to explore what's out in the market, and if there's another vendor that could offer a similar or better benefit at the same or slightly increased cost, would that be something the town would be interested in understanding? And so Jennifer has asked a few providers within the market if they would provide us with a proposal. And you're getting to sort of a decision point for a lot of these insurers to understand who's looking to come in for July 1. And there's also sort of a ethic within the market that they try not to compete with members who are already spoken for. So the request that you saw in the email was one of the vendors saying, happy to provide you a quote if the town of Irving's interested, but is the select board okay with us providing a quote that may compete with your current provider? And so what I think Jennifer and I are looking for is, if the three of you are amenable to it, permission for us to explore what's out in the market, bring back those proposals for the three of you to consider, and if there's a vendor that's different from the one that we have today that you were interested in maybe having a contract with to provide dental insurance and vision, that we could explore that option in the next few months. This is not committing us to changing vendors. This is not committing us to changing a plan. It's just to collect the information that the three of you can review.
So why can't we offer more than one plan?
That may also be the option.
With the employee making the choice.
We very well may be able to do that as well. I think all the options should be on the table. We just have traditionally had this one provider because it is the provider that the trust offers.
Yep.
That's the only
So
reason.
the only concern I have is in the response from Maya saying that Hampshire Trust requires you to terminate by 12/1 if you plan on terminating as of July 1. So it's not something that, if we are planning on terminating, it's not that we can bring it back at our next meeting on 12/5 unless we've reached out to Hampshire Trust already.
We've already notified them that we are potentially looking at what other options exist. We're certainly not in a position to say that we're terminating benefits.
Right, and so if we come to the determination that we want to terminate services and we find something better, we've missed our window.
But then it's next year that we do it. I mean, the
Okay.
reality
All right.
is any insurance change is a big change. There very well may be multiple meetings that need to be held on this.
Okay.
There may be meetings with employee groups.
So it's not imperative that we
no.
hit it for this July 1.
The question has just come up over the last few months, and this is sort of the preliminary steps to explore what exists in the market. And if you don't ask and you don't receive the proposals, how can you even do the comparison?
I don't love Guardian, so
Right.
I can relate. I don't know if you can, I know you can offer multiple, I don't know if you can offer competitive. Like a lot of times when they offer multiples within the same
right.
carrier or
Right,
grades or levels,
right,
I just don't know if that's even
I'm
allowed.
not sure.
But your question is like, did we have to say yes, we're terminating or no, we're not by the 1st? Would we be interested in saying we were interested in seeing options and considering it if they'll let us
Later on in
have
the,
a little longer deadline to saying yay or nay, but we're considering?
yeah, I mean,
'Cause I
that would
think
be,
that was a
that'd be a
question, if they
question
give
to
us
Hampshire
leeway.
Trust.
Right,
Is there
right.
leeway? And even Wendy from Maya said, sometimes they'll give you leeway on that deadline of, they just don't want you coming to them June
6:30?
Yeah, June 30th saying, oh, by the way, we're canceling tomorrow.
Well, there may also be if a member or other members are also trying to look in the market and what else is available, that may also motivate the trust to explore what options are available to them.
And
So-
modify
Or they
the
may offer
benefits.
other options to us. That's
Exactly.
right.
Yeah.
How large is the dissatisfaction? Is it, I mean, is
I don't
it
think it's been measured.
One person or two or?
It's been several employees who have asked if there's other alternatives, and I don't know
okay.
specifically what their experience is with the insurer. If it's the limit of coverage, if it's beyond like a routine cleaning evaluation,
Okay.
and it's more dental procedures that are being done. I don't have the information on that. But if that's something of interest, I could ask the employees who are benefits eligible if they want to anonymously report back what their experience is, just so you have a sense of satisfaction with the product. We could solicit that information. I just wouldn't want to present that individually. So we'd have to find a way to aggregate the feedback.
No, but I think the treasurer, if she's going to be researching plans, needs to understand what are the
Right.
areas of concern or deficiency that employees would like to see addressed, because otherwise, what are you shopping for? Are
Exactly.
you shopping for better premium? Are you shopping for better coverage?
Yep.
Higher limits? There's all these pieces,
Right,
right? So,
right.
So yeah, we can pull
and I'm no
we can pull the
benefits
staff.
expert, but
Yep.
I would hate to go out and shop around and get a new plan to have the same exact issue.
Yeah.
right. Thanks
Yeah.
for looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
Let me work with the treasurer and we can pull the staff. I don't know if everybody who's
Yeah.
in our health plan also chooses to have the dental and vision, but we can ask that group, and those who feel like responding can choose to respond. And this would be aggregate of both town and school employees. So
Does that mean we meet the 100 threshold? Does that mean we meet 100 threshold?
we have well over 100 employees.
That
But that take
May
advantage
roll.
of,
that could be in the dental plan. Maybe they're not, but they could
Right,
be.
just a handful of employees aren't benefits eligible. So
Right, but that doesn't say they are or aren't. I know
Right,
there,
and I
there's
don't
a
know if they
100
all-
plus threshold there for some of it.
I'm sure we'd be very close if not.
according
there.
to Jen, we're not.
Did
currently-
she answer that?
She
I
did
didn't see
answer
that.
it and
Oh,
say
okay.
that
We're under it?
we're under the 100 that are taking advantage of it at this time.
Okay, perfect.
So maybe they're
Thank
getting
you.
their policy from somebody else.
I
Correct.
missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean if there was a different alternative, they may
If
or may
there's
not
a-
be interested
If
in
there's a
that.
better plan, and some they might switch. You're right.
Yep.
But that's
So
not
it looks
important
like Maya's just looking for documentation on file that that we are actively pursuing a proposal from Maya, and they're not just out shopping around for clientele.
Correct.
So they want to know that we're initiating that request, not Maya initiating offering
competing against-
services.
yeah. I guess, are we comfortable saying we're interested in understanding what's out there competitively?
Yeah.
And to notify the trust that we're looking at other plans?
Yeah.
We're not ready to give them a yay or nay, and can they give us an extension?
Right.
And then is Maya willing to quote us in that we haven't said we're going to leave, but we
Correct.
are interested in seeing what's out there. Is
Yeah,
that
the
kinda
final
where we're all at?
thing
Yeah.
from Wendy, from Maya, was that they just want to know that we are the ones initiating the
Okay.
proposal, that they're willing to give us with some numbers.
Right.
Sure. Yep, makes sense.
Okay.
Are we
And
good
this
with-
is not
well
the
good
only
with that?
vendor that we potentially are going to be asking for quotes
Right.
from. So it's just one of.
It's not the only you said?
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There's a few other vendors within the market for Massachusetts, and so I know that she's been reaching out to any of the ones that she's heard other towns have had generally good success with, and to see what potential policies they could offer. So we
Excellent.
could bring all those responses, what we do receive, to the three of you for consideration.
Excellent. Good enough.
Okay, we'll do that.
Discussion regarding electronic and bulk waste collection and procedures at Public Works.
Can we
Pass over?
pass over that till next week?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Back to review of the personnel policies and procedures manual draft. I know it's getting late and I don't want to not spend a little more time on it, but I know we don't want to be here all night and we could be here for days if we try to hash through all of our thoughts tonight, right? So that being said, are there a couple areas that you guys would like to talk through right now? And then I'd like to give the opportunity if anyone in the audience has any specific
We have
ones
the
they want to
audience
bring.
here. I'd like to hear, maybe
Okay.
they have some specific issues that they want to talk about, or they'd like us to talk
work for
about.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I have a few responses Brian has acknowledged in some notes, some conversation pieces that have come up throughout the discussions.
The employee discussions.
It
and
might have
things?
even been prior to that too.
Oh, okay.
Prior to the employee discussions, they were just different items, and I threw some notes on mine.
Okay, excellent. Gentlemen, do you have any specific things you'd like to bring to us that you have
Not right now.
thoughts, considerations, concerns with?
I did send you guys an email.
You did.
There are a few, but I don't wanna belabor tonight, so
Okay, I haven't had a chance to read them, maybe
then when you guys see my email, I know you can't respond because it's a group email, but I'm more than happy to sit down and talk with you guys, so.
So I think we addressed one
So-
of them,
We did,
which was
Yeah.
overtime.
we started talking about that,
Yeah.
I would say if either of you have read his email and have any clarifying questions for it, I haven't read it yet, so I really can't say, but if you had any clarifying questions to what he was saying or presenting, I would ask that we'll bring them up and clarify anything.
Yeah, I mean, I have a response to the holiday
Why don't
request.
you come on up, Chief?
I guess the holiday, so the complex issue of holiday is that we have departments that work more than 8 hours a day. And so we started to address this and have this conversation at the last department head meeting when we reviewed the policy manual. There are, and I think my response at the time was, there are 12 holidays given in any given year that we observe. And so we break down the average standard work week throughout all departments, minus a couple of outliers, is 40 hours on 5 8-hour days. And that's how we allocate 90% of our employees on any given work week. When you take a holiday, it's based on that 8-hour implementation. So for everybody else that happens to get paid for all 12 holidays for not working because they were off and they get the holiday pay, it equates to 96 hours of pay. If I have a police officer that works 10-hour shifts and he works all 10 holidays and we pay him for 10 hours on all 10 holidays, he's getting paid 120 hours for working the same holiday that somebody else,
Or 80
or didn't, because you're not getting both. You're getting the 8-hour pay and you're getting your hourly rate. If you don't work, you just get the 8-hour pay. Even if you were regularly scheduled for 10 hours, it's still just 8 hours, because if that officer didn't work any of those shifts, if they were off every single shift, it's 96 hours of time. And if we pay you at 10 hours per shift, per holiday, that's 120 hours. So that's just fictitiously making up an extra 24 hours that person is getting paid over another employee.
Right.
So it's an unequal.
It's an unequal-
You're not giving the benefit equally across the whole workforce.
And I hear that, and just hear me is that, take Thanksgiving, for example, because we
Yep.
just had Thanksgiving. My officers come in and they work Thanksgiving. That's their scheduled, normal 10-hour day
Yep.
for that 40-hour work week.
Correct.
We're only paying them 8 hours.
No.
You're paying them 10 and they're getting 8 hours of holiday on top of that.
So that's the change. So Chief, this is the change that we're going to. This is where the clarity needs to, the practice needs to, we've had this conversation before. So the
May I ask for
practice
one
is,
second though? Didn't we just adopt this
yeah,
leading into this season?
yeah.
We dealt with a different issue. We dealt with the issue that
Oh,
was
the prorated.
that was the-
prorated
But it
part-time
was
employees.
setting this as 8 hours for every holiday.
Correct.
That was, we thought we were addressing all of the issues for holiday. This is the second issue that's
So-
arisen around holiday.
So here's my thing is if any one of your employees that's working 10 hours, they're working a double, they're working 18 hours, it doesn't matter what they're working above and beyond 8. They're there, they're working a day. They're getting paid for that time. And they should be getting paid for 10 hours because they're there for 10 hours. What they're doing is the treasurer's office is now allocating 8 hours of holiday time on their books. They can take that time whenever they want. They have 8 hours on the books to take some other time. Or they're getting paid the 8 hours on top of that time. So they're getting 8 hours of pay for the holiday. If they happen to work a 10-hour shift, they're getting 10 hours of pay for working that day. So they should not be working a 10-hour shift and only getting 8 hours that day.
They should be getting 18 hours that day.
18 hours that day. Whether or not they use that 8 hours of pay for that day
Is
or
it
not.
flexed or is it on the day of? That was on the day of.
Well, it depends. If there's the staff member who's scheduled to work that day, and then there's the employee who wasn't scheduled to work that day, and there's a flexing or realization of that holiday.
Right.
So it's either recognized on the day you're scheduled. Is it recognized on a day you're scheduled? If it's not the day of, is that what you're saying?
The
Yes.
difference is if you weren't scheduled to work that day, you still get the paid holiday at straight time. If you are scheduled to work that day, it's an overtime shift. It gets paid out differently for the employee who's scheduled to work that day.
But you don't choose to take the 8 some other time.
Correct.
Okay, so you're
When you said like
okay.
you can choose,
So
it's
then
banked,
so then
not,
it's
just
overtime
paid.
rate for the.
It's just paid.
Yeah, it's just paid.
So I hear you, and maybe I'm just not understanding. My guy, we have an officer that works Monday through Thursday. Thursday is the holiday. Monday was 10 hours, Tuesday was 10 hours, Wednesday was 10 hours, Thursday was 8 hours holiday, 10 hours overtime. Overtime does not go towards the regular 40 hours. So they only worked 30, 10, 20, 38 hours that week. They're not getting credited those extra 2 hours. Yes, they're getting it credited in their overtime, but they're not getting credit those 2 hours in their straight 40-hour work week. And that was their scheduled day to work.
Yours is the difference of 2 hours.
Right, but they're getting a benefit of 2 extra hours of overtime. Instead
But
of
they're
giving
not
them,
eligible for overtime if they don't get 40 hours.
Well, after the 2 hours of straight time on that holiday, it is overtime. The last 8 hours are overtime. It's whether you're starting the day or finishing it on overtime.
At the end of the week, they had 48 hours they worked.
Right.
And they got 8 hours of overtime for it, right?
Yes,
No.
they
At
would have
the
had
end,
to.
at the end of the week, they worked 40 hours, but they were only credited for 38 because the holiday was paid at 8 hours.
But 10 hours.
But
of
what about the
overtime.
10 hours? You're only 38. They worked 48. They got 48 of pay.
Right, but they should have been paid for 40 hours of straight pay and 10 hours of overtime pay.
How?
No.
They didn't get holiday and work time of 50 hours. They got holiday and work time of 48 because there's 4 times that they worked and there was 8 hours of holiday. That's 48 hours. How that's broken up between
So
regular
this
time
is what I
and
was saying.
overtime
This is what I was saying,
difference
Chief. If you did
about
that at
whether
10
we-
hours, if you did that at 10 hours like you're saying, and you're trying to say that they should get 10 hours for the holiday and 10 hours for working, that puts every holiday at 10 hours. So if that same officer works all 12 holidays, he's now getting paid 120 hours, whereas the person in the next department is only getting 96 hours. It's irrelevant that you work a 10-hour schedule. It's an 8-hour holiday. We cannot fictitiously make 24 additional hours and pay them for holidays that don't exist. That's 2.5 days worth of holiday pay that you're asking us to
Three.
come up
Yeah,
with
2.5.
out of nowhere.
Three.
Well, yeah,
24 hours.
Three full days. So it's 3 full days of holiday pay that you're asking us to create because your department operates in a 10-hour workday.
Let me ask this, what is the gap that you're trying to fill? Or what is the issue? What is the specific issue?
That they're getting their regular 40 hours of straight pay.
So,
How
So-
they're not getting their 40 hours.
So, I
so
mean,
on
they are.
their, just so if I just looked at that week on their timesheet,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna get 10 of straight, 10 of straight, 10 of straight, 8 of holiday,
Mm-hmm.
and 10 of overtime?
Right. And so when you calculate 38 hours at straight pay,
Yeah.
let's say it's $1. So they only made $38
Yeah.
for that week's worth of pay, when every other week throughout the year, they get paid 40 hours, $40 for that week. So they're
But-
technically getting 2 hours less pay of their straight pay.
Sure. So let me go to what's proposed in here, and I know we had a lot of discussion earlier about overtime and what's counted towards the overtime calculation, what's not. Let's just take it at FLSA, like Bill said, just as a baseline, that's the minimum. If we use the FLSA basis, they would get 10 for Monday, 10 for Tuesday, 10 for Thursday, 10 for Friday, and there would be 8 hours of holiday pay at straight time on top of that. They'd get 40 hours of straight pay and 8 hours of holiday pay at straight time. Because they worked 40 and they got 40 of straight time, and then the holiday is a separate pay at straight pay. So they'd get 48 hours of straight pay, effectively.
If we followed FLSA.
If we followed FLSA, which is the draft proposal, it doesn't mean we'll end up
Correct.
there.
Correct.
What you're saying today is they're getting 10 hours of overtime when they only work 38 hours, right? So they're getting paid straight time
No,
of 38 and they're getting 10 of overtime?
No, because they're still working 40 hours.
I'm not asking how many they worked, I'm saying what are they getting paid for?
What are you putting on the timesheet? is
What are
I'm
they getting
asking.
paid, 38 straight and 10 overtime?
No, we're paying them for 40, they're making up 2 hours somewhere.
What if they didn't? I understand you're saying they
Okay,
are,
yeah,
but what if
yeah.
they didn't? What would that look like?
Yeah, they would get paid 38 hours.
And then 10 of overtime.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, I would argue they didn't make it to 40 yet. They should have gotten 40 of straight time and 8 of overtime.
Correct.
To me, they're getting 2 hours of extra overtime that I would argue you normally shouldn't.
Correct.
So they're getting a benefit of
Of an extra
an
hour.
extra hour of pay, or 2 extra
That they
two
haven't
extra
earned yet.
overtime hours that they wouldn't normally get, because
Yeah.
that's actually a full hour more than their 40 hours would normally would pay them.
So
I actually think they're getting a
So
better
if you're,
benefit.
if you're calculating paper time,
You're
paper
following
time
that?
first. If you're calculating paper time and punch time, the way we've always done it, paid time, paid time off. So the holiday would count as that. It's 8 hours. A holiday is 8 hours, and we can have this discussion until people are blue in the face. But I'm not going to jump to the stance that a holiday is 10 hours. It's not.
I'm with you.
It's not. It's your department functions on a 10-hour, and we may have to make accommodations of how you utilize time and how you get paid. But a holiday is 8 hours. There's 96 hours that we pay throughout the year for people to take time off for the holiday. If they have to work, we pay them for that 8 hours that they have to be there. You look at the overall time, and it should be 10, 10, 10, 8 for a holiday, and 10 hours, which will trigger 48 hours total. It's 8 hours above 40. We're counting that holiday as time worked. It's 8 hours of overtime. That's
I'd
it.
actually argue if they're getting paid 38 and 10 of overtime, that's wrong. It should have been 40 straight and 8 of overtime.
8 of overtime.
At max.
Correct.
I would argue they never should have gotten anything for overtime until the 40 was met. And the 40 is met by what they did, not by the holiday. Or even if the holiday counts, overtime's past 40. So it's 38 and 10, that's 48. They only get overtime for the 8, not the 10.
Hey, you guys are throwing too many numbers at me.
And that's totally fair at 9:40 at night, and I can't imagine when you were up way earlier than me.
I hear you. I'm just not seeing it.
Okay.
I'm just not seeing it. So
Let's-
maybe we
Let's
just
do
have to
something
have a
on,
sit
let me
down.
put something on paper, or if
Yeah,
you
we
have
can-
time
we can-
to,
we can chat
I think
offline.
looking at it and comparing what we're trying to say, what happens now, and what at least I think we theoretically believe should happen at best case, might make more sense on paper.
And to see it on my payroll paper.
Absolutely.
Right.
Take one, okay, this is today, this is the way we think about it, and this is what,
Right.
I mean, potentially at best case it would be.
Right. Because I agree that and I think my staff agrees, I don't want to speak for them, but if Thursday wasn't their day to work, if that was their normal scheduled day off, we're still giving them 8 hours to take somewhere else or to be paid that 8 hours of straight pay. So in that sense, it is an 8-hour day. It just gets confusing for us, or for me, and I say for us, because I think we all are kind of like trying to get our head around this, is that when we physically scheduled to work a 10-hour day on a holiday, we're really only getting 8 hours of straight pay. So, but we can.
I think we shouldn't.
I
I think
can
you
show you
shouldn't
on
be, and
paper
it's
about-
actually being done wrong. Wrong, if you will, and not as a judgment, but we're trying to be consistent,
Right,
right?
exactly.
So going forward and figuring that out. So I think it's actually being allocated incorrectly. So
Correct.
if we did, then it wouldn't be perceived as a gap. I think one problem with the whole thing is whether or not that 8 hours of holiday does anything for overtime. Because if it didn't, if you worked, you'd get 40 hours and 8 hours of holiday pay, and all be straight time. And the person that did not work would have likely already worked 40 hours and got 8 hours of holiday for the day they didn't work.
Right,
Everyone
but
would have got 48 hours of straight time.
Incentivize the person that is to say, hey, the person that has to work the holiday. We
Gets-
realize it's Christmas. We realize it's Thanksgiving.
Sure, sure. And so whether that's overtime or
Right.
not, the idea that the employee that didn't work and the employee that did work got the same amount of pay. Because the holiday was given to everyone as extra pay. The time you actually worked is the time you actually work. So everyone got to 48, whether they worked
Whether
that day
they
or
worked
not.
40 or they worked 40, 8.
Whether they worked on the day of the holiday or not, assuming they worked their normal schedules, everyone got 48 hours that week. So it's consistent.
I would like to sit down.
Whether
and
or
just
not
look at it
any
on
of that
paper.
is overtime or not is a separate piece.
Take 5 minutes
and I
after.
think,
I can
yeah,
show you.
yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
So that was the issue that I had about that. We did discuss the other issue on
Overtime.
Oh,
overtime.
and-
I did have one question
Sick donation?
on vacation.
Oh, good.
And I had brought this up in the meeting today. The department heads are responsible for making their employees aware of potential forfeiture of accrued vacation leave. It's on page 18.
Fourth paragraph.
I would like to see, I mean, we do provide our timesheet for all our employees. You know, I know, me personally, I've always kept very close eye on what I had for time off, sick time, and so that I would think that employees would care about that and be paying attention to that. I just think that it kind of potentially leaves the department head in a situation that if by April 30th, I forget to tell somebody that they have, a week's worth of vacation that they have to use, and then they lose it, they're gonna be pointing the finger at me saying, well, why didn't you tell me? So I just had mentioned it, I mean, it's minor, if that is what it is, then I guess as department heads, we need to, pay close attention, but I do think that department heads have a lot of other issues and areas that they're focusing on, so.
I agree with the chief's recommendation on that change. We provide notice to the
Change
treasurers.
of what? Change of doing what instead?
Strike.
Sorry.
Reference to the department heads are responsible, and then clarify that the employee is responsible for keeping track
of their-
of their current accruals. The treasurer's office notifies every employee regularly of what their current, it's by month, of what their current status is for the use of their accruals.
They're all notified monthly by the treasurer's office?
There's a benefit sheet that's sent to every employee.
Every employee?
I
I know there's some, but I didn't know they were to every employee.
And there's 2
And they're
copies,
dispersed out.
and I go through it, I make sure that their vacation time and their comp time was marked off, and then I give them a copy of it.
Yeah. I would have said, could the treasurer's office issue an update once a year halfway through and been happy with it? So if
Yeah.
you're telling me that they do it monthly already, why would we expect
Right.
anyone else to do it even more?
And
I-
our
I
goal
know-
is,
I think that quarterly would be nice.
My,
and then
my
not-
only expectation for 20 years was that I knew when it was coming, I could only carry over so much. it was my responsibility as the employee to request a waiver from that if there was exigent circumstances and I wanted to request a waiver through my supervisor. It's on the employee. It's,
And
it's your time.
I would rather, I think of things about like, you can't come in the last 2 months and try to get all that time you didn't take yet because you're going to lose it. Like there's a cap on how much you can request
You
last
can still,
minute.
yeah, you can
because
still be
of-
denied based on the department needs.
Right, because exactly, because that whole
Yeah.
thing, that things happens. You have those that do it right away and those that do it all at the end, and
Yeah.
both cause issues. So
We agree.
we agree.
It's on them.
And then I had a few other
struck.
issues, but I think we ironed them out. I had an old copy. Brian provided me with a recent copy, so on some vacation carryover and stuff like that.
Right.
So other than
Okay.
that,
Oh, okay, yeah.
Got it.
And you're, just real quick, you had mentioned something about a sick leave
okay. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that.
donation.
I've mentioned this to Brian. I understand that it can be a tricky issue, but I know personally in my department we had an issue, and I would like to have given some time. And because we didn't have a policy, I wasn't allowed to do that. And granted, the situation was taken care of. The officer was paid time, but they did go negative in sick time. And I just think that it's, one, we could maybe just give them an employee that's starting with us, maybe we just give them their 2 weeks sick time up front. I understand that maybe there's issues with that, but some sort of something in place that says that I've got almost 1,000 hours of sick time. I'm never going to use it. If one of my officers gets sick and is out for a week, it would be nice to.
Yeah.
So how that looks, I don't know, but I really, and I don't think that it's a really, I don't think it's a well-liked idea amongst other departments. I could be wrong, but I
Well,
don't know if it is. But I know for me and my department, it would be nice to be able to.
So the state has a system of a time bank or a sick bank where you can opt in or you can opt out. And so you can, it's not mandatory. If you don't opt in, and by opting in, you're donating to the bank a certain, I think it's 1 day, 8 hours or 16 hours, whatever the case may be. You now have access to that should you need it in the future. But I'm not in favor of doing a pool where it's mandatory that everybody
No, I agree.
donates. But, I understand your idea of.
Well, I think Brian had mentioned, I forget how you worded it, Brian, or
Like a
maybe
directed donation.
where it's not requested, but somebody can see a need and offer.
Right,
So
just directed, so hypothetically you would, and I'm only picking on Glenn because he's still here, you would say, oh, something's going on and Glenn doesn't have time. I want to give Glenn 3 days of sick time because he really needs it and doesn't have it.
Right.
Right.
And that's a choice. Like,
Right.
that we just say, you can gift it if you want. There's some issues with the actual dollars and truing up all
Right.
that versus
Yeah,
hours and all
that's
that, but we
negligible.
can
That's
choose to ignore
negligible,
that and
though,
not
when
care and just allow it.
So I would just like to see
Versus
that.
a bank and a pool and all the dynamics of who gets what and how, and that can, there's pieces to
I
that.
could see having
pros
a
and
conversation,
cons.
a conversation about opening up the idea of a directed donation. So you could say, I got 1,000 hours, I'm never going to use this new officer. I'm going to give him 40 hours of my time, so he can
Right.
take the week off.
And whether,
We can work out the-
we share people's private situations, they may share it and others know, and then say, hey, I'd like to help them out because I got
Right.
something going on.
Right.
So, that's a way to.
It's a
And plus, I
conversation.
mean, with COVID, I mean, it's mandatory you stay home. And I mean, we're talking about, we don't want employees to come to work sick, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I had an employee, that came to me, he's like, I got the sniffles. And I'm like, maybe if he had time, maybe he would have taken a sick day type thing. So just something that I'd like you guys to think about.
Appreciate the idea.
Just to follow up on Chief, we have discussed this with a few other staff groupings. There is interest in a directed giving, not a pool.
Not a pool.
Okay.
So if you're okay with it, I'll research maybe a couple options, some potential language. I don't know if it needs to be in this manual or if it's a standalone policy or how that, if it's even something you want to go forward with. But there does seem to be an interest from the staff, but a lot of concern about going into a pool.
I thought our old policy had some language about use of sick time. Is
We're
that
very
right?
detailed about the use of sick time,
Yeah.
but nowhere, it goes on for pages, but we don't have any language that
Giving or
allows a
sharing?
gift. Yeah.
I was wondering.
I like the concept of it. The idea of a pool concerns me.
Right.
So, but I like the idea of considering something.
Yeah,
If
I
you
do
open to
too.
considering
Yeah,
it, yeah,
yeah.
okay. So, yeah, if
Okay.
we can find some language for more of a directed, I would hope it could almost be simple.
I think the
There's some
issue is
minimum. I would think there should be a minimum you can't donate if you
I
don't
was
have
gonna
enough,
say
because you
that.
don't
I
want to
would-
deplete your
yeah.
own to be in a
Right.
position.
exactly.
So,
So I think we have to work on some of the language around that. We have to obviously be careful of not sharing people's health information. So like you said, employees talk. If one employee is moved by another employee's issue and they choose to give, that's their business. It's not the town to
we're not
facilitate that
publicizing
information.
that people need time.
Right. And I think the other piece of that is to figure out just the logistics of how the treasurer's office is notified that such a gift is being made so that they can fix it on the benefit sheets. And then I potentially have to deal with the accounting side. If the gift is between two departments, how do I move money or expenses, or how does that figure out? Because budget's already been set. So there's some accounting logistics I need to figure out how that may or may not impact the department. And that's more if you're talking about an extended leave. Because if you have backfill positions or do something else, you're going to potentially draw another department into the negative that didn't have that liability already factored into their budget allocations. So there's just some,
Yeah, backfilling would probably be the only,
right.
Backfilling for the person who's out?
yeah. That would be the only.
It all comes from the same salary line item within the cost center that the employee is attributed to. So in the, for instance, that you gave, Chief giving to Glenn has a certain budget appropriation in the highway department for his staff in reasonable time off. Chief has done that for his department. If there's some extenuating circumstance in the highway department and we have to backfill,
Right.
and you've gifted
You-
time from one department to the other, the cost allocation hasn't moved with it.
What if you just kept it
You can't
department
just bill it to the
specific?
department who gifted it?
That's what I'm saying, we just have to figure
Oh,
out how
yeah,
to do
okay,
that.
okay, yeah, but
Yeah.
you could.
Yeah, I just don't know what that.
In this example,
but the
if it's
policy
chief's
needs to
time in the
address it.
police department that he's gifting, then
Well, I don't know if the
time is
policy
billed
needs
to
our,
our financial policy or process.
yeah, the manual doesn't. have
No,
it.
but
doesn't need
a
to
policy must
explain it.
address how that happens. There's
How do they get-
mechanics behind
Yeah,
that.
okay,
Yeah.
I see. Okay,
Or if
yeah,
it was
yeah.
just department, like you're only donating to your own department. I don't know. But regardless,
are the
you're willing to
complexities.
look at it. So
Yep.
I think that's all I had. Maybe stuff will come up throughout these next
I'm
weeks
sure.
and stuff. But
There'll be a few more readings.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I know there's been references to the time it's taken and the body of work that everyone's done to get to here. And as much as I know everyone's been anticipating and waiting, it's not going to be quick that we finish it either. So, because we want to get it as right as we can, as fair as we can,
Right.
addressing as many things as we can.
Right.
So
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Appreciate the feedback.
Yep.
You have also, most of the feedback you've gotten in employee meetings is marked up in the version tonight, or
Yep.
you have additional?
The version in your packets is the most current version with feedback that either made sense, it was grammatical or nothing substantive.
Sure.
And so I can give you the red line version so you can see that line by line. And or
But
it
the
was
input's in
comments
there.
and
Yeah,
you saw the
okay,
comments.
okay.
Yep.
Well, I will. I didn't, I
in the
went right by
packet.
it, seriously.
But I will send that off to you.
Okay.
The feedback I got today is not in there. So we had another session today. So
Okay.
I will summarize that feedback and send
For our
that to you
next
as well.
meeting, yeah.
Yep. Chief was
As we're
one of
getting
the
in budget
attendees.
season, it's going to be harder to balance this, so
Agreed. But you at least got one.
potentially we'll have
employee.
more meetings than we have scheduled, just to try to work through it, I think. Any others that either of you want to bring up tonight? Just pointed pretty close to wanting to wrap for tonight, if you guys are.
You know, I
It's just if
I
there's
have
any
other
to
points,
think about, but-
so the only thing I would request is that just go through and look at the
comments.
comments that
Yeah.
Brian has put in there, and those were,
I
and then
think
you'll
you
have
already
new
were, right?
comments.
Yeah.
We don't need to bring them up tonight. We'll have enough readings where we can discuss those later.
Okay, well, I'll mark them up. I'll read them and mark,
Yeah.
my thoughts, and
Yeah.
we'll come back to them.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And I'm sure we're going to jump around a little haphazardly,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we'll try to make sure we'll keep good notes of where we all have things and make sure we get back to them.
So what I can do for today is send off the red line version of what you already have in your packet. So that's no additional work other than you'll have the Word version. And if that's easier to follow where changes have been made versus the PDF version that you have, I'll send that off. After tonight, getting ready for next week's meeting, would you like me to make further revisions to anything you've talked about in the packet that you will review next week? Or do you want to keep the version that you're working on tonight that's already in your packet for next week and keep working off of that? And I can just make a list from my notes about what you've discussed for tonight. Did you want to see, I guess,
The latter.
do you want to see further
The latter.
revisions in the packet or do you just want to see like a running list of what you're talking about and working on?
I would like to see the latter.
Okay, just a running list?
Yeah.
Okay,
So the document from tonight's meeting will be
I
kind
won't
of the
change it for
base.
next week.
We have all the questions and or comments, and then you'll have a memo or a running list of other
What you've
things.
discussed, yeah.
Because like we talked about striking this, department heads
Yep.
notice, but there's a few that we asked you to look for more.
Right.
So those pieces as you find them.
Right.
Because we can supplementally look at those
Yeah.
next to.
Got it. Okay,
Does that work for you?
perfect. Okay,
At some point, we probably will have you incorporate everything we've
Of course.
agreed to
Yep.
and do another rev.
right.
Yep.
But I don't think we've gone through enough of all the feedback
Agreed.
to have a rev.
Yep.
I think that's what you were getting.
Yep,
So,
okay,
Okay.
yep.
Anything else for tonight?
No.
Budget reviews begin next week, next Monday. Excited about that, Brian, I can tell.
Just to be really clear, I'm gonna likely be unavailable for the next 3 days to just put that book together, so by Friday, you're getting your budget books, so you have time over the weekend to start looking at it, both electronically and print if anybody wants it. Because all of the requests are poured in over the weekend, and I gotta finish putting it together, so that's gonna be the focus for this week. So,
Perfect.
I don't know what else, I've already drafted a bit of the
Forward your
agenda.
phone to me, I
but
can
that's-
put them all in voicemail quickly.
Okay,
Okay. Anything for next meeting's agenda? We have budget, we have this, we have some carryovers.
tax classification hearing. Next
Ne-
week,
Needs to be, wants to be,
ideally.
ideally. Okay. Is that work for you, gentlemen? So
That
we're
works.
good. I know we had some assessing
We're good.
software issues. That's all clear.
Everything
We're
was
good
approved
to
and resubmitted last week, was approved today by
go. Approved by
DOR.
DOR, okay.
Board of Assessors met earlier today to vote on their recommendation for the three of you, so I can post it as a joint Board of Assessing meeting, and we can have the classification hearing next week, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay,
We have joint finance at 7.
joint finance at 7.
We do 6:35 for assessors if they're
Okay.
available. Yes, sir.
Do you have time for the backup review next week too, or do you want to do the week after?
Are you ready?
I will be.
Put it on the list of topics.
Yeah.
We'll let you know for sure. I'll probably have it on there.
We'll see how the meeting goes.
The-
Period, it's fine.
Yeah. The issue is just I will try to give you a heads up. I don't want to keep you all night to then say we're going to pass it over at 10:30 or something. So we'll try to
Thank you.
let you know. Okay.
Okay.
Good?
I'm good.
Good. All right. With that, I'll make a motion. We adjourn at 9:58 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.